All right, so
Okay.
where should we recap? He was talking about the orphan genes last week, or not last week, last time. It's been a few weeks since we covered this, but we were talking about uh, what he was getting wrong about the orphan genes, how we actually found them occurring in the fruit flies in the lab, and he said since most of them later died out, that none of them occurred at all in the first place. Um, and then we were gonna kind of recap some of the ape orphan genes as well.
Yeah, so it's more specifically the ape orphan genes I wanted to recap. The fly one, the rebuttal he gave, I don't even know where he got it from. Because it's not in the book, in his so-called book, and it's not in the paper I cited, so I don't even know where he's getting the argument from. But the one with the human and chimp orphan genes, that one I know where he's getting it from, and he's getting it wrong.
All right. Yeah, I think either way, it's just misinterpreting the text.
The hell is that?
As usual.
Novo genes from the human and chimpanzee manually state in the study. What is that? Here we go. So they directly state in the study 8 de novo genes from the human and chimpanzee matched annotated protein coding genes. So they are shared between the two, according to them, and this is their best evidence. Now, before I move on and I tell you why they were that this is not true, they tend to have a simple structure. This is orphan genes I'm talking about.
Pause.
Right. So that part where he was talking about the 8 annotated genes, and he said that was the best evidence. When I'm not too sure if it was trying to, it seems like he was trying to imply that annotated genes was a type of gene in the genome. To me, that was what I was getting from what he's saying here and what he has in the book. So it seems to me that he was saying that orphan genes is a type of gene, but not orphan genes, but sorry, annotated genes. But annotated genes are just genes, that you know the function and so on. So it's not a specific type. It's just genes where you know what it is. It's in the name, annotated genes. So yeah, I'm not sure why he said it's only 8, because the paper was saying is that of all the orphan genes they found, the between humans and chimps, 8 of them they know the function for, and the rest they didn't really study that as yet. So basically, that's what it was saying. So he misinterpreted that big time.
Mm-hmm.
Now, they're very small. They have a short protein size of only 52 amino acids long, and they're more A and T rich than conserved annotated genes. And
we covered this a little bit last time, I think, but he's trying to say here that the 52 is too. What did he say? That's pretty much his limit. So anything above that is too large. Um, but that's just not true. There's huge proteins, much larger than that. About the median size is about 400, 500 amino acids. Um, and the original definition for orphan genes was at least 100 amino acids. And of course, you pointed out also that that's the 52 was just the average as well.
Yeah, because the paper itself, he wrote because he's getting the information from his quote unquote book. He's reading it wrong. So the paper said that the median length of the orphan genes were 52 amino acids, and then he wrote in the book that it was only 52, and then he said 52. But if you go and look at the book now, as it is now, he removed the only, and then he put 52 amino acids in brackets. So I'm not sure. Now he's implying that it's not. You remove the only, and now we just have 52 amino acids, but he has it in a bracket. You're trying to say.
Mm-hmm.
they are preferably expressed in one.
Maybe you remove that only part. That
Oh, sorry, I thought you were done. Go ahead.
Oh yeah. So he removed that only part, the only now he just but it's the same problem.
You're breaking up a little bit.
The only wrong assumption.
You're breaking up a little bit. Maybe we'll just play a little bit more,
Break.
and then because you were sounding fine for a while there.
Is it still broken up?
Oh no, you sound good now.
Okay.
Maybe just go back a couple sentences.
Oh, so what I was saying is that because he already started off by saying, 52, there was only 52 amino acids. The argument he's now bringing to say that, well, these are longer than 52 amino acids, therefore they can't be orphan genes, is also wrong. So all the arguments that stem from that first thing he got wrong would just be wrong down the line. It's pretty much what's going on here now.
Yeah.
Than conserved annotated genes. And they are preferably expressed in one tissue. For example, there's 52 orphan genes in a brain. So orphan genes are found in specific areas, and they tend to be correlated to only one aspect for that. Now, why that's important is this. This is why the study said de novo genes were not enriched by bidirectional parameters in respect to the rest of the genes, indicating that this is not a predominant mechanism for de novo formation, leading to orphan genes that they had expected. So they didn't even expect this. So when you investigate these 8, it's not a simple gene structure, nor are the proteins short. So they contradicted by what orphan genes are and said that these are orphan genes when they're actually not. For example,
Yeah, so he's defining orphan genes as having to be shorter than 52 amino acids and having to be not having to be simple, whatever he's meaning by that.
this one, the
I'm sorry, could you
GT
repeat that? Sorry.
Yeah, he's just going over. He's saying that they can't be longer than 52 or else they're not orphan genes, but that's nowhere in the definition of orphan genes, and that they have to be a certain level of complexity, whatever that means to him.
Yeah, that was kind of strange when he said that. When I first heard just it passively, why would a of gene only 2 amino acids long? It's kind of strange why it's so specific number.
Yeah.
mechanism for de novo formation, leading to orphan genes that they had expected. So they didn't even expect this. So when you investigate these 8, it's not a simple gene structure, nor are the proteins short. So they contradicted by what orphan genes are and said that these are orphan genes when they're actually not. For example, this one, the GTSR-CR1 gene, encodes for 137 amino acid long protein. And here's the link to that. It's all in our book. I should be linking that anyway, but I'll do it at the end. So if you notice, these genes, when they mutate, they actually cause disease. An orphan gene is supposed to be a dead gene that doesn't do anything.
That's not what an orphan gene is either. Do you know where he's getting
That's
this
not
from?
what it is either. I don't know where he's relation from it, or sometimes I would try to uh, take the quote and then Google it and find where he's getting it from. But I don't know where he got that from.
Yeah, and it's really hard to see any of the text he's got here. Um,
Or basically, you have to refer to the book. So whatever you're seeing here, you gotta go to his book. I wonder if I can send you the link to the book though.
yeah, I don't know what
Let me get
the
that book.
I don't know what the I haven't taken a look at it really, but
So 100,
yeah, I mean
100.
these are easy things to Google if you don't know, and an orphan gene is just something that basically doesn't have another homologue in some other lineage. It's it's lineage specific. So where he gets this thing about dead genes, I don't is he
Right.
might be getting it from the Drosophila study where they said that most of them lost function, but other than that, I have no idea. But he feels confident enough to write a book
Yeah,
about it.
him and Standing.
Yeah.
I send you a link to the book in Hangouts.
All right, I got it.
So that's a link to the book. So I think you may have to just search orphan genes, and or you can just type in 52 amino acids. That's 52 amino acids. I think it would get you right to that part he's talking about. So that's the book, and uh,
Yeah. You seem like you're breaking up a little bit again. Um, yeah, I'm not seeing anything why he would say this.
They're supposed to be non-coding and de novo. They arose from nothing and they do nothing. Well, when they mutate, they cause disease. And we found
They arise from nothing. No, everything in evolution is just a modified version of what came before. Um, just because the specific variation of the modification may not be something seen before, but it's modifying something that existed in the parent generation. It doesn't just pop into existence like a creationist, like a creation of a whatever God created.
because that's what you think orphan genes are. But again, orphan genes are just genes that don't necessarily have a evolutionary homologue with in neighboring species. So you usually find them with like horizontal gene transfer and so on. You can't really find the agent that actually did the horizontal gene transfer if it's a virus especially. So it's hard to find the homologue for that specific sequence. Or if you have like a species that exists, let's say um, an aardvark, for example. Uh, all its living relative, hardly has any living relatives. I don't think it has any close living relatives. So there would be many genes where you can't necessarily find a homologue because all the relatives have died out, so you won't really find that. So basically that, or sometimes the gene itself is going under rapid evolution, so it evolves so much so that it becomes indistinguishable from its parent genes. So it's pretty much like an orphan because you can't necessarily identify the parent genes any longer because it diverts so quickly. So
Yeah,
yeah,
you can't tell what it
no
came
one
from.
is implying that orphan. Yeah, you can't really tell. According to how fast it diverged, you can't really tell exactly where it came from.
Because even in the life cycle of the Drosophila genes, um, they were saying, of course, we know this, but they deny it. There were observed duplications of genes, and so they duplicate and then they variate, and then after they vary, you can't always tell what they duplicated from.
Right. So sometimes when they duplicate and they go under modification, they no longer look like the or resemble the parent gene they came from. So then to be orphan.
that they actually do something. So these 8 de novo genes that are found in the chimps are protein coding genes. So look at what the Max Planck Institute in Germany stated. They stated that if orphan genes represent valid human protein coding genes, that it would be concluded that the vast majority of orphans were born after the divergence of chimps and could not have been shared. Well, since that is exactly what they do, then they are not shared by chimps and humans like they're claiming. So you see,
Got anything for that? Or should I play a little more? I know this is what you wanted to get to.
You can go a little more.
Okay.
the Max Planck Institute has nothing to do with this original study, so they contradicted each other. So it completely invalidates their claim about orphan genes being shared between the two species. So we do not share these genes like they're saying that we do. It's just another good, throw it in and make them more related.
I mean, this is another sum equals none argument from creationists. So the majority aren't, therefore none are, which just baffles me every time.
Right. So if you know that if you were listening in from the beginning, he said that they found uh 200 and something genes shared the two, and then for some reason just neglected that and went on 8 annotated genes. So you just forgot talking about the 200 and something. He started talking about the 8 annotated genes, and then he said that because they're longer than 52 amino acids, they can't be considered orphan genes, and that's when you get to the zero. That's where he got to zero.
Hmm.
It's just nonsense. The orphan genes, I mean, this is all more like in-depth reading if you wanted to go into it more. I just really wanted to touch on that. So they're saying that the 53% of the orphan genes contain sequences derived from transcribed elements that are nearly all located in primate-specific regions. Well, if you look, here's the human and here's the chimp. You can line them up and guess what? They're not even 5.5% identical. Not even close to what they were saying. So that's a good one. I'm enjoying that. It's all about just reading the fine print. When you get into the stuff, it's so easy to just see what they're saying and what they're implying. They're implying something. They're not giving you evidence of something. They're implying that it's probably true. So, and obviously an evolutionary study, which is grant funded by 5 different evolutionary regional development centers, is going to get evidence for evolution because that's what they give grant money for. And here's the companies that actually grant funded that thing to present evidence for evolution. What a surprise.
Well, as we were discussing earlier today, creationists literally just throw out any evidence that doesn't conform to their biblical model. So I'm not sure
That's the
what
same
basis he
thing.
has to complain about this.
Let me see. What's the quote? Where's the quote I sent for you? I look at it. That's it here. What if I could copy it and send it again?
Yeah, the statement of compliance or whatever. Yeah, which that was on answers on
That's
in
not.
Genesis, I think. But yeah, and then Dr. Jensen was just repeating that exactly. Any molecular model has to conform to biblical standards, or else they throw it out.
And then they had some, other stipulations as to what must conform to what. So, any genetic, data they find must conform to, biblical kinds and so on.
Yeah.
Bias of being biased. And now they're saying that, he's saying here that because evolutionary institutions funded the study, they must find evidence for evolution. So it's kind of, in a sense, he's calling conspiracy.
Yeah. When they are very open about their conspiracy.
That's the point.
Um,
And the thing,
okay,
the
go ahead and play.
thing I find kind of is that they think that these people are so incompetent as to make this this grand conspiracy, but yet they would publish the work at the same time. So, um, for example, when Stanley Richard were talking about the footprints found in the human footprints found some 3 or 4 million years before humans, who is publishing the work? It's evolutionary biology. So if there's a conspiracy going on, why would they publish something that apparently disproves evolution?
Yeah, and
It doesn't make any sense.
in that book, the phosphate rocks. They always talk about they threw out the bones and stuff. It's like they recorded it, they talked about it, and then they saved the other ones. So they're clearly not hiding anything.
Right. They didn't have to write about the bones. They didn't have to write about the first set of bones. So I don't get it. Same thing with Tiktaalik when they found the Polish foot tracks that 12 million years or 18 million years before Tiktaalik,
Yeah.
and they go on harping about it. But if evolution is a grand conspiracy, there is no reason to publish this work. No reason at all. They can just hide it because no one was there. It was just them, and they can destroy it in the same way they accused the evolutionists of destroying the dinosaurs. The same one you and Neff was debating about the time.
Yeah, and of course it's actually, the Tiktaalik tracks specifically. Well, they weren't Tiktaalik tracks. Is the thing is what they're saying is they're much younger than the Tiktaalik, therefore that can't be a transitional form. And it's like that's not really how it works. The Tiktaalik is just one example of a fish that has feet that went up on land, and that can happen to the whole population of lungfish or the whatever was kicking around. All right, should we go on?
Let's see. You can go on a bit again.
As to how often genes indicate what is related from
Evidence for evolution. Here. What a surprise. Okay, go ahead and hit play.
As to how often genes indicate what is related from what is not. They are too morphologically distant to be related. Again, creationists use this between humans and apes, and they are quick to point out the differences between humans and apes, ignoring the differences. They're quick to point out the differences between humans and apes and ignoring the similarities. But this argument can't be taken too seriously when you look at the kind of variation creationists accept within a kind. The argument also doesn't hold up when you take into account that we were able to derive morphologically distinct forms by means of evolution with brassica, for example. So you can't use that as evidence against evolution when we're able to do it by means of evolution. The argument completely falls apart when you take into account transitional forms that bridges the gap between morphologically distinct groups. I would refer you to two videos by Bill Ludlow and one by Little Did Man that explains this problem. They are too genetically distant. They can't be related.
I saw plants there. He wanted to say that we can't use morphological homology to say that something's of the same kind when you're looking at cruciferous vegetables and they produce multiple different varieties that look nothing like one another.
That's macroevolution there. I mean, if
yeah, that's macroevolution, but because I never heard a creationist actually distinguish like tell me the difference between what is the maximum variation between kind and the minimum amount of variation you would accept macroevolution. The minimum criteria. So tell me the difference between the maximum amount of variation you would accept within a kind versus the minimum amount or your minimum criteria of what you would accept as macroevolution. So how to distinguish variation within kinds from your minimum criteria for what counts as macroevolution. Yeah. They never tell you.
And that's important, the minimum criteria, because they always look to, well, you think a pine tree and an elephant are related, and it's like I'm not asking for the most distant possible comparison that you have. I'm asking for the minimum. Like, where can we start?
Yeah, so they try to shift the goalpost as far as possible. Obviously, we won't be able to give them that kind of variation in real time, and they know that. And then they say, okay, it's a fairy tale, you can't show it. No, evolution is a process as any other process. That kind of change would require a certain amount of time as anything else. So yeah, so you can't go that far. Try to bring it more closer to home to something so that's why I usually ask them for the minimum criteria, but I never get that. I never get a creationist to tell me the difference between what they accept as variation within kinds from the minimum criteria macroevolution.
I would agree completely. That's illogical to assume that you're going to just look at a fossil and assume that it belongs to a particular plant species or kind. But I don't remember ever doing that myself, and I don't know of creationists that do that. So I don't really know what to say about that. I've never imagined trying to puzzle together an ancient extinct species and trying to link it. Now, some are very visible. I mean, you can find multiple ferns that have been fossilized, and they're part of the fern family because ferns are distinguishable by their leaves. But anyway, go on.
So he just contradicted himself. You can tell based on morphology, but you can't tell based on morphology.
That's basically it. But the thing is, I showed earlier in that same presentation, I think it's earlier than that, where Answers in Genesis, they say that you can classify kinds based on the fossil record, and they have ceratopsians within the same kind. I've seen creationists classify what's the family Rexes are in.
The what?
Tyrannosauroids.
I don't know.
Tyrann-
Oh,
Tyrannosaurus
Tyrannosaur?
Rex.
Oh, the theropods?
No, the Tyrannosaurus. I forgot the name of the family. Anyways, they would classify that as a kind. Even him, Ramat, he, I remember in the comment section when I asked if all trilobites are the same kind, and he said, yeah, they're the same kind. They're all trilobites. You can tell they're all trilobites. So, which means that what he's using to classify them is comparative anatomy because we don't have any DNA, and of course we don't know we've never seen them interbreeding, of course. So the only thing you can use there is comparative anatomy. So the same thing he is what he's doing there, he's trying to dismiss it in a sense, but they actually accept that. So you can't really take him too seriously when he rejects something that he accepts.
Yeah, and he says the family level is usually what is meant by a kind. And of course, theropod is the family level that tyrannosaurs are in. Um, but sometimes creationists will accept that tyrannosaurs are just large, like velociraptor kinds, or vice versa, and some creationists will separate them out as if they're too different. And I want to know how they're deciding that they're too different. Like it's not, it shouldn't just be a gut feeling type of thing. Um, and of course, they also group animals in the same kind that cannot bring forth with one another. And how do you do this other than comparative anatomy? Like there are species of rabbit that cannot breed with each other. And then hares, which is kind of like a wild rabbit, they can't breed with any rabbits. So, but they're all supposedly rabbit kind. I'm wondering how they know this, other than comparative anatomy.
Well, despite all standing for truth, he likes to talk about Biomonologists don't use genetics to classify things. They use comparative anatomy. They use this kind of morphological continuity between species. So if there is a high continuity, then it's classified as a kind, and anywhere there's a gap, then that gap is where the kind ends, and then the new kind begins. Um, when the continuity begins with the next group. So that's basically it.
And
They don't actually use genetics to classify anything, and for good reason they don't do that because if they want to use genetics to do that, they would end up classifying humans with apes.
yeah, and the transitional forms, they can only be classified in those gaps between the larger kinds, and that's why it's important. Is they like to dismiss those, and usually they'll try and put it in one kind or the other, but then that increases the variation of that kind exponentially because it's so different yet similar to two different kinds that it fits best between the gaps.
And that was a point of me citing the videos Bill Ledlow and when they later on in this same video he would talk about the same slide. Obviously they never watched videos, I guess, because the videos was not about Bill Ledlow's present human evolution presentation. They were talking about Todd Wood's methodology of how he classified kinds, and how when scientists use the same Todd Wood's same methodology, they classify humans and apes. I think it was Center did an analysis where he used the same kind of matrix thing they use, where they use character states and morphological continuity, and they linked the birds to the meat-eating theropods based on his own analysis, right? And what was happening is that he was showing that Todd Wood was ignoring the data with respect to current finds, dinosaur finds. He was just using old data, old finds, but new find if you use current data. I think I have it. Let me see if I can get a picture of it. Make sure what I'm talking about.
And it makes sense to put humans as a type of ape because of such restricted diversity in human, like there's, you could argue that there are human subspecies, but um, generally they're considered one species. And so, but the creationists are arguing for this system that creates multiple species from one single breeding pair that was on the ark. And so, why hasn't that happened to humans? There were more breeding humans on the ark than there were for most of the different kinds that supposedly had enough time to create different species. So, I mean, I know they're going to say that there was a population bottleneck for the humans on the ark, but there was an even greater one for most of the animals.
Right. So, well, Standing for Truth's explanation for that was because God made two humans in the beginning, that somehow restricted the amount of variation God can put within the genome.
Right.
So somehow two individuals restrict what God can do. So there's a restriction, there's a limitation on what God can do with two people, apparently.
And how does he know that either? That's just kind of like made up to fit the model.
That
It's not. It doesn't come from anywhere.
I really don't see how that follows. How God can be limited by two people, even if our current genome size doesn't allow.
I mean, even if there were like multiple different kinds of people, or what am I trying to say? Like, if there were different species of people, like there were some who looked like humans, some who I don't know looked more alien. You know, there were different races of intelligent beings. Well, shouldn't they all be loved equally by the creator? I mean, it's not real. There's no real reason why it has to only be this human model for all of time, unless you're saying God literally looks like a human and we're made in His image, which that there's a lot of design flaws in the human body. All right, should we go on? Are you still there? Did we lose him? We lost him. Well, these things happen. And this is part of the game. Technical difficulties abound. This is the third time we've tried, third different method we've tried. It was working for a while though, so let's see. I got no live chat to distract us while we're waiting. Let me exit out of that. Of course. Now let's take a look at this. Testing out my soundboard.
You serious?
There we go. You back in?
Yeah, I'm back.
All right. Let's see here. Oh, let me test, can you hear my soundboard, by the way?
The soundboard.
You serious?
Yeah, did you hear that laughing?
No,
Oh,
I didn't hear it.
Oh, okay. I just created a soundboard with like little clips of memes and stuff. But oh well. I was just testing that out. Anyway,
Okay.
where were we? I'll open up on your little slide here if you want to explain it.
Yeah, you can open up on that.
Yeah, can you? Oh, I'm not sharing. That's probably why you couldn't hear. All right. There we go. Now you should be able to see it.
Let's see. Nice. So wonderful. So the picture on the left is basically Let me see on my side. Nice. So what he's doing, what center is doing here, if you on the left, you would see basically a kind of matrix they do where they have this kind of 3D. They use the character states and they make this kind of 3D matrix, and wherever the species cluster, that would be a kind, and the gaps would be different kinds. So what happened here is Center was using dinosaurs that they know of from 2000 and beyond, but before, and you can see that the dinosaurs they don't cluster much. The birds and the dinosaurs they don't really cluster that much. But when you use the dinosaurs and birds you know of in 2009, because they found a lot more of them, you get them to cluster within the same kind. All right. So basically, what was happening is that Todd Wood was using old data, so that's why he was getting, you know, one cluster, two clusters, and there were large spaces between them. But when you include everything, all the species we know of, then they tend to cluster together. So you could imagine what would happen then to use all the dinosaurs we have so far from, well, 2019 up to 2019.
Yeah, I mean, whenever creationists are arguing this point, uh, and most points, their data is about like 20 years old. They don't factor because there's been a lot of discoveries very recently that contribute to the bird to dinosaur knowledge or just feathers on dinosaurs itself. And even AIG has
What
admitted
I think
that some of like Calinda dromius has I'm not sure what they call them bristles. So basically that could justify feathers or hairs on reptiles, but they admit that.
is that because there are not much of them, there are not much creation scientists, quote unquote, that I don't think they can keep up with the data.
Yeah,
I don't think they can actually keep up with all that data. That's what's going on. So it's so much that it's weighing down on them. So it takes a while for them to keep up because it's just it's just them. So whereas in or an evolutionist would have the the luxury of having taken research from their peers and then gathering it together, and um they can take larger sample sizes when they do a study because they can do larger statistical studies and so on. But the creationists don't have that luxury. There's it's just them in their little creationist camps. So it they're always behind the curves.
that's true too. And they just kind of get set in their ways and they think they have it figured out and they don't keep looking. All right, should we move on from this slide?
Oh yeah, you can move on to the slide and back to the video.
All right. I think they're waiting.
Again, this argument is used to distinguish humans from apes.
Well,
And what the creationists would say, for example,
right.
is that the evolutionists
Uh,
Go ahead and play it. I couldn't hear anything. That's why. Sorry.
Oh, I got you.
calculation of 98% DNA similarity between humans and chimps is wrong, and that Tompkins' calculations of 81% or 88% is correct.
Okay.
Now, I'm not here to point out the flaws in Tompkins' methodology for
All right. Well, he brought up Tompkins' work, and he said Tompkins' work is faulty. Okay. Go ahead. Actually, play a little bit more. Just like 20 seconds or something.
many have done that before me. But what I'm here to point out is that he only used that method between humans and chimps. For Tompkins to make such an argument, he needs a larger sample size, meaning he needs to do it between more organisms. So I predict that because evolutionists use the same calculations to get a 95% DNA similarity between tigers and house cats, that if Tompkins was to use his same fundamentally flawed arguments, the DNA similarity would fall by a similar effect. Now,
All right.
we don't have that evidence now, but again,
Okay, go ahead. I have a video that I made precisely answering this because Tompkins actually did his work based off of the studies that showed there was not much similarity. Here's one of the studies that I found that actually shows right here that if you go down, that it is not 98.6% identical. It actually drops to 86.7%. And this is a PubMed study on divergence. So here's a peer-reviewed scientific evolutionary, not creationist study that showed that it is 86.7%. Also, you can see in this video that I'm going to play for you guys, it also shows that Tompkins did not get his numbers from creationist things, nor did he come up with it on the fly. He actually used evolutionists. So I'll play that for everybody, and I will full screen it. What is this? That's not the video. You know what? It is just going to have to work. Here we go.
Did you want to say anything before they start?
Right. So the part he's talking about where the evolutionist paper said it falls down to, what he said, 80 something. Basically, they were saying is that it falls down to there when you include indels, basically, right? But normally they don't really include that. But there are different methods of DNA comparison. So, for example, if you have like a duplication that you have like 100 amino acids duplicated. Do you count it as one change or 100 changes? So it differs. So basically, in that study we were talking about the evolutionists, they would just count the the indels as each nucleotide change. So if there was a change that changed 50 nucleotides, they would, instead of counting it as one change, they would count it as 50 amino acids different. So basically, that's what they were doing. That's a similar thing Tompkins did, but a little bit more flawed. But that's a point I was trying to make, is that if you want to use that method where you include the indels in your study, where you include the indels and the unalienable DNA sequences, if you want to include that, if you were to apply that with tigers and house cats, the DNA similarity would fall as well. Now that was my argument. That is my argument, is that I predict that if Tompkins used his methods between tigers and house cats, that the DNA similarity would fall from the 95.7 to a lower amount. So therefore, what will happen is the goalposts. It's just a case of the goalpost moving with the net. All right. So if he wants to argue that, okay, humans are not 98, but instead are 88% similar, fine. But you need to use that on more species. So try it between tigers and house cats and let's see what happens. If the DNA similarity falls as well, then there is no argument to be made to have, because it fall by the same effect. They're basically the same thing. Um, they totally missed their argument. They didn't address any of it. They just went on and on and on about Tompkins' methodology and how evolutionists ignore, I think 11% of the chimp genome and how much percent of the human. I already know this. I already know that. What I'm saying is that my argument was, I'm going to repeat it again. If you use Tompkins' methods between tigers and house cats, the DNA similarity would decrease. That's my prediction. I'm standing for Truth Love's prediction, so that's my prediction. Go ahead, use it. Let's see what happens.
Yeah, you have to use the same methods, the same standards if you're going to compare them. So they are using a method that lowers the number for humans and chimps and comparing that to a completely different method that still has a high percentage for the kinds that they want to be related.
Right, because the same method where they ignore the indels and so on and so on, that's the same method they use to the tigers and the house cats. That's the same method they always use. So if you have a problem with that method, that's okay. You have a problem with it. But whatever method you want to replace it with, you need to apply it across the board as well. That's basically what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Simple.
And I think Tompkins' methods is primarily based on alignment, right?
Yeah, I think he has a unique way of doing it. So I think it was scientist Sam. I don't even think he has videos again of evolution on his page, but he was explaining the methods of how Tompkins done how he did the how he does the sequencing.
All right.
actually.
He's always going to get a large.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was saying he's always going to get a large difference because of the method he used. He in particular, but it's okay if you want to use a method. Fine, you want to use a method, that's fine, but you need to apply between more species. That's my argument.
Yeah.
And that's the argument they totally missed. So the whole 7, 8, 9 minutes they went on there, they didn't even touch that argument I was trying to make.
Yeah, you're literally said that you're not gonna say how it's inaccurate or anything. You're just saying you need to use the same standard, and that just went right
That's
over
what
the
I was
head. And
they're so preoccupied trying to prove the point.
yeah, we don't have that standard for cats though because they haven't bothered to do that. I wonder why.
Usually and in the end of the video, again, in the end, close to the end of my presentation, sorry, I stated how creationists apply their calculations. They only apply it. Those kinds of not enough time or Tompkins calculations. They only apply to species they don't accept are related. They never apply to species they accept are related.
Yeah, it's like comparing apples to oranges.
I want to make sure everybody can hear this, and if I go full screen, I don't know if they will. Okay.
Sound. So go ahead and.
Let's
Hey,
talk.
I've been listening in. You guys are doing a great job.
Thanks, man. I'm about to show him a 3-minute clip because he said that Tompkins made up these calculations that chimps are very low in connection. Well, here's Dr. Daniel Jensen saying that no, he actually got these numbers from an evolutionist and he expounded upon it. So I was going to play 2 minutes to show that because he actually shows the websites.
Brilliant.
Yeah, so expounding upon it is he's doing his own things to it. He's not just directly pulling the numbers from peer-reviewed papers, but he is doing his own modifications to it, which is, again, the actual argument is that's fine as long as you do that to tigers and cats as well.
That's the argument, and it's going to go on. That's going to go on for like 6 minutes.
Mm.
Yeah, brilliant. Actually, hey, right before you play that, I noticed one thing. He had a slide. I want to touch on that real quick before you go on to this, just in case we forget. He mentioned the so-called pre-human species, and then he directed us to Bill Ludlow's videos on, hominids and hominid species, for example. But all of those are easily debunked. And what he would be showing, and I know that ESE there had some fossils that he's saying overlap with humans and are transitionals. But the thing is, Homo naledi, the hobbits, for example, Homo erectus, Neanderthals, all of these so-called pre-humans that Bill Ludlow points to, they're actually nothing more than inbred subpopulations of humans that experienced founder effects, inbreeding, and genetic degeneration actually gave rise to those populations. So what they're saying are transitional forms are nowhere near transitional forms. And there's also been fossilized footprints of anatomically modern humans in layers with Australopithecus, like Lucy, for example. So that's just, destroyed human evolution all in and of itself. It's funny reading the papers and the articles of the explanations and rescue devices these evolutionists have, but honestly, every single one of these so-called human ancestors are easily debunked. Bill Ludlow's entire presentation is easily debunked because, like I said, whether it's the Denisovans, Homo erectus, all the features that they have are simply evidence of, for one, reductive evolution, and two, just genetically compromised humans. And there's also evidence, DNA evidence, that all these so-called pre-humans live together. They, were breeding with each other. They were living at the same time. There's no there's no progression in regards to ape to man evolution. So DNA evidence, fossil evidence, everything just destroys that entire slide that he had.
Well, I know you wanted to address those tracks he was talking about too, which were actually he's totally misrepresenting.
Right. So I'm trying to get I'm just trying to get a picture for them here. I think I sent one already. It's kind of disconnected.
I've got it on my phone, but so I could read it. But I think I know what you're talking about. But yeah. I'll get it up.
That's it.
There we go.
And then I got to send the one what he the citation he gave for it.
There we go.
So first off, what he was saying is that Bill Ledlow's presentations are easily debunked. The videos I cited was not on Bill Ledlow. It was on Todd Wood. So you can see they didn't watch any of the videos. And then he went on saying that, easily debunked. What I find strange is that he said that all those hominids are just subpopulations of genetically compromised human beings. Where is he getting that from?
Yeah, and well, I mean, it's his assumption. It has to be to make the rest of it make sense. But my question is, how come some populations are degenerating so much quicker than others? It would seem that there are actually genetic forces in effect that are slowing down this genetic entropy that he talks about. So if it's not happening uniformly in all populations, then some of these, selection factors are actually keeping the genetic entropy at bay, which is totally against his
What I
arguments.
what I find strange is that he talks about genetically compromised humans. What kind of disease can really reshape the whole anatomy of a being? Because they're obviously not modern humans, Homo sapiens. They have different skull features and um, body features and so on. But he says that these are just genetically compromised humans, whole populations of them, a matter of fact. So anytime you find one, it's just a genetically compromised human, whole populations of them. So they all date around the same age and so on.
Well, what he's saying is that humans can evolve into these ape-like hominids, but the hominids can't evolve into apes because evolution is this one-way track to degeneration, even though we observe that that's not true. And of course, the toes, some parts were similar to humans, and some parts were more similar to apes, making it a transitional form.
Right. So in regards to the toes and the paper, they how they describe the toes and everything, you can see they went into detail describing the toes. Right. How let me try to read it. Okay, so they said that the tracks resemble hominid prints due to their plantigrade and taxonic nature, whatever word that is. By contrast, the morphology of the sole print is not especially hominin-like. Compared to a modern human sole print, it is proportionally shorter, with a narrow tapering heel and lacks a permanent arch. The prints are also smaller than any known hominin print population. Under this interpretation, the tracks would represent a small, primitive, habitually bipedal hominin with hominin-like pedal digits and a ball digits and ball combined with an ape-like sole lacking a bulbous heel. All right, so how they're describing the foot. That's in the original paper, and then in
And SFT says they're exactly modern human.
he said that they're exactly modern human. But the thing is, you can skip past the second one. This is how they describe the tracks in the citation again. Anatomically modern human looking footprints have been found in Crete. I don't know how to pronounce the name of the
I think
place.
it's Crete.
That date to approximately 5.7 million years old. It's Crete.
Yeah, I think that's
okay.
Greek.
So found in. Oh, okay.
Or something.
5.7 million years old. This finding suggests that humans significantly predate or reported Australopithecine ancestors. So, if you notice here, and I haven't read that they have it's a complete lack of descriptive detail, no descriptive detail whatsoever. failure to mention the mixture of ape and hominin characteristics, so they don't mention that whatsoever in this little thing here. The misleading assertion that the tracks are anatomically modern human footprints. Nowhere in the paper said that. They said that the only the toes are somewhat human-like, and they conclude by saying that humans predated. Well, of course, because they start the premise is wrong, then the conclusion would be wrong, saying that humans predated our Australopithecine ancestors when the author of the paper said it was clearly a hominin. All right, so they butchered the paper. That's why it's a good reason why they didn't quote the paper. They just said their own thing. And because I was wondering where Stanley got that from, so where did he get it from? And then when he cited it, and I got the citation, this is what the citation said. That's all they said about the prints. So no detail whatsoever. They don't describe it, and that's a common thing with creationists. For example, when they talk about stasis in the fossil record, when they show you a fossilized form compared to a modern form, there's never any descriptive detail. They don't even have measurements as to the dimensions of the fossil in question compared to the living organism. So there is nothing to compare it to say, well, if they're actually the same. They don't describe it. Just take a picture of something that looks like this, and then take a modern picture that looks like that, and that's it. They didn't change for millions of years.
Hmm.
But paleontologists, they describe things in meticulous detail. They measure and they do scans and all these things. And it's, down to the millimeter, they measure these things. So they can tell the difference between, um, you know, something that was in the fossil record and a modern day species. Despite creationists looking at them with their untrained eyes and saying, hey, you know what, this looks the same, paleontologists can tell the difference because they're trained to do so. And the same thing here with the footprints. All right, the paper does go, I mean, I could only quote so much, but the paper does go into real detail as to why the footprints are different from modern human footprints. It has it has a heel of a chimp, and it has certain features that are not found in human feet. So it's only the toes that somewhat have that kind of human-like look about it. But even the author said that the toes had the ability to swivel more, like a thumb. So it had the ability to swivel. So no, it was not a modern, an anatomically modern human footprint. Nowhere in the paper indicates that. That's something they just pull out of their asses.
Yeah, the big toe isn't completely straight either. And like this is why I don't use creationist sources to learn anything. This is why I'm not, going to read their books or anything like that unless, to actually address the arguments and try and debunk them or something like that. I'm not going to use them to learn or as the source. I'm going to go straight to the scientific uh, the actual reports and not the creationist rephrasing of things because it always turns out to be wrong, like very obviously wrong. And like you were saying with stasis, the fossil crocodilians are they're very different from modern crocodilians. And yes, we can say they're still pretty much crocodile type of lizard or reptile. But if you look at the actual fossil crocodilians, they have these very strange skulls most of the time, and so there is some stasis in that. Basically, the heavily armored large lizard morphology is conserved, but there are very obvious differences that occur to them throughout uh, the fossil record and evolutionary history. And the creationist favorite, the coelacanth. Let me see if I can find that real quick. But
I have a wonderful one with some turtles here.
yeah, the old coelacanths do not look anything like they change throughout the fossil record. The old coelacanths don't look like modern coelacanths. Uh, I don't know where I put that, but yeah, I'll put it up if I find it somewhere. But yeah, so stasis doesn't really exist. Even with bats, the fossil bats don't have echolocation bones in their skulls. They have claws on each one of their fingers. Modern bats do not have that. Yeah. Shall we go? Yeah, I'll put up your slide here. Yeah.
So you can start with the right. So basically, that's how they do it. Always like a meme kind of thing, where they have two things that looks alike, and that's it. There's no dimensions here as to say, well, what's the size of this turtle compared to the fossil. There's no description of the fossil itself, because sometimes when you look at the fossil and you look it up, turtles, sometimes you get the turtles with teeth and so on, but they don't mention that. And this one, Here is Evolution. That's actually a Facebook page called Here's the Evolution, right? There's a Facebook page called Where's the Evolution? And then there's another page that refutes all their arguments called Here's Evolution. So here they show a cladogram as to where, all, turtles and so on evolved over time. They didn't just remain as one type of turtle. And they showed, the different types and so on. And the next slide shows where the Facebook page called "Where's the Evolution?" They deceptively edited out two of the stem lineages for the turtles, and then they said, well, as you can see, the variation remains within the turtle kind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they always have to take stuff out to make sense.
That's a Facebook page. I used to be on that page. Where's the Evolution? But they blocked me for doing pretty much the same thing. Here's the Evolution is doing, because I would show them a cladogram and show them, this is actually, they did a thing on the Walemi pine, and I did a kind of cladogram too, but showing them that pine trees, there are many different varieties of pine trees, and apparently they just blocked me for doing that.
Yeah, they don't like that.
Yeah.
All right.
So I noticed that. I wanted to touch on that briefly. But the a couple minute clip here that Matt's about to show is brilliant. So if you want to get to that.
Okay, sure. Yeah, it's pretty quick. I just want to make sure that you guys hear it. So yell if you cannot. I'll make sure it's loud.
And one quick thing, I want to let Standing for Truth know he can come in under Standing for Truth, even though we're both on at the same time. I want to let him know that. Do that, yeah.
All right.
You're going to show us this article. So this is a secular article, right? This is the paper people point to when they say humans and chimpanzees are kissing cousins, essentially. Okay. 2005, Nature, one of the big three journals in the globe. So this is the chimpanzee genome sequencing paper. I'm going to zoom down now to the section of the paper where they actually talk about and where this 1% number comes from. So here on the section called genome evolution, nucleotide divergence, so difference basically. They aligned, so best reciprocal nucleotide level alignments of chimpanzee and human. They're aligning human and chimpanzee DNA, 2.4 billion gigabases, that's 2.4 billion letters of DNA, including the sex chromosomes. And here's where they say it. We calculate the genome-wide nucleotide divergence to be 1.23%. So, settled, isn't it? Well, what does this 2.4 gigabases, 2.4 billion represent? You just scroll up a little bit here. The assembly statistics, the total amount of DNA that they had from chimpanzee was 2.7. 2.7, 2.4, who cares? Well, 2.4 divided by 2.7 is 89% of the total sequence. So this 1.23%, see if I can get them both on the same screen, 1.23% difference comes from 2.4, which is only 89% of the total. In other words, we're 1.23% different in 89% of our sequence, and 11% is unaccounted for or unalignable. Why is that significant? Well, you have another website here. This is just an independent organization. They've done alignments of human and chimpanzee with a different algorithm. And they say, you scroll down here, genome coverage, how much of the chimpanzee genome is found in human? 89%. So two independent sources giving the same number. So my colleague Jeff Tompkins has done his own independent alignment of these, same number, 89%. 1% different, 11% difference. It still seems close. Well, let's put this now in terms of absolute number of letters. How many letters different is an 11% difference? It's about 300 to 400 million differences. So this is a gigantic genetic gap between us and the chimpanzee. Furthermore, the evolutionists, this is a 2014 paper in Science, they've measured the rate at which chimpanzee mutates. We already knew there's been a whole bunch of studies on the rate at which humans mutate. Now we know chimpanzees. And it's not what they predicted. So for years, textbooks have been saying humans and chimpanzees split from the fossil record 46 million years ago. Well, based on the number of genetic differences, even if they say, well, let's just look at 1%. We know the rate at which humans mutate, which chimpanzees mutate. So the difference, 1% difference, human mutation, chimpanzee mutation. This now says they must have split 13 million years ago. So which is it? This is 100% off from what they said originally. So they're not making accurate predictions in genetics from their evolutionary ancestry model. So this model to me is not very successful, and the 1% difference is definitely not accurate. There's hundreds of millions of differences
And
between
yet
us and
school
chimpanzees.
kids are being taught that as fact, and many people out there have this erroneous.
And there you go.
So when you actually compare the unalignable sequences gene to gene, there's like one or two letters, bases different between most of the genes, which is basically negligible.
Yeah. So uh, basically what they're doing is just criticizing the method used to sequence the genome or compare the sequences between humans and chimps. Basically, that's what it boils down to. I'm okay with the criticism as long as you apply it across the board. You gotta be consistent with the criticism. So if it doesn't work here, then it should not work here. So then if you apply that same criticism between tigers and house cats or camels and llamas or whatever within kinds, we just apply it within kinds, then all the DNA similarities you would drop the same way, and then there would be no argument to be made because if every pair of species DNA similarity reduces, then it becomes the same thing because what happens is basically the goalpost moves with the net. Um, I sent a picture here. Do you remember when Ramat was talking with Aaron Ra and he said that turtles some turtles lost their shells?
Yeah, and Aaron Ra was like, "What are you talking about?"
Yeah. I think he's getting it from this meme because I just read the little text on the side here and it said that some marine turtles today also lack hard shells, which they may have lost, and the Odontocheles may have also lost their hard shells. So yeah, because our Odontocheles here, they hadn't. This is not losing a shell. What happens here is that they didn't fully form the shell as yet. So what I think here is that he's getting it from either this meme or something that took from this meme or wherever. But I'm not too sure he got it from. But
Probably,
I
probably from
would
the
bet
leatherback
that
turtles.
he got it from this meme. It like. Hmm?
Yeah, he's probably talking about the leatherback turtles who have like a soft shell.
Yeah, but what he said is that they lost what he was telling Aaron Ra that some turtles have lost their shells.
Yeah, I don't know
Yeah.
what he would be talking about other than the leatherbacks, because I think he was talking about extant species.
Let me see. You may have maybe have mistaken the Odontocheles for an extant species, but I can bet he got that from here. I'll just bet my money on that. What I'll do, I'll peruse the book and see if I find that meme.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I guess to go back a little bit, I'm not sure what Nathaniel Jensen here is confused about. He should know what genome alignment is, and that's just whether or not the genes visually are in the same spot, and that's not accounting at all for the same gene in a different spot, which is just that's what the unalignable regions are. And in those unalignable regions, the similarity gene for gene is like above 96% anyway. So, and the fact that 89% alignment is achieved any is well, I mean that's an A minus, right? That's pretty incredible. There's not that same kind of alignment within accepted kinds that they accept as the same kind, even within like flies.
Right. But again, they're not interested in finding out what um DNA similarities within kinds. Usually, as long as they're within the same kind, they accept the variation without question. They don't want to know about orphan genes or DNA similarity or whatever. As long as they're within the same kind, they accept it without question. Because remember, the variation within the kind is just variation that was built in, apparently. So nothing could affect it. There's no time limitation, no time constraints. Um, there's nothing restricting the variation within kinds. But as soon as you go outside of the kind, then you have restrictions. The Haldane dilemma would come in, waiting time problem or whatever, but they never applied within kinds. That's pretty much what's going on.
Yeah. This is what I was looking for earlier. These are the different uh, kinds of coelacanths through the ages, and as you can see, they do not retain stasis at all. They are very different, and I know creationists always like to complain about uh, drawings and cartoons, even though they can actually highlight the actual differences that you might not be able to see with an untrained eye. But here's the fossils too. They accurately reflect what the cartoons are trying to portray. These are all coelacanths, and they're all different, and they're all different from modern coelacanths. So, the fact that they're saying that there is any stasis here is a recognition that there's a huge amount of variety and change that can happen due to evolution in a species.
Yeah, and I don't. They don't. You see, what happens is they don't understand why stasis happens and why it's not a problem
Mm-hmm.
for evolution. They think that evolution must just continually happen at one rate,
Yeah, they don't seem to
and
understand selection pressures at all.
they don't. I usually try to explain it to them with dogs, with wolves and dogs. They accept this, and it's easy for me to try to explain it. And I will show them that wolves from 10,000 years ago or 6,000 years, whatever age you want to choose, they pretty much look the same as wolves today, right? We have wolves from, I think, the dire wolf, whatever. It was a bit larger, but the same structure. And then the modern wolf is a bit smaller. Fine. Now, if you compare those two alone, it would seem as if no evolution has occurred, right? But what you ignore when you compare the two is that dogs also came from wolves, and they have a wide variety. So you can see that although one lineage of wolves remained stable, other lineages branched off and diversified into dogs. So anytime you try to tell them that anytime you make this argument on stasis, never neglect the other members within the clade you're talking about. So if you're talking about the coelacanth, don't ignore the other coelacanth. So if you're talking about ferns or pine trees, whatever, always include the others, and you would see how diverse it is. All that is happening is that one lineage is remaining morphologically stable over time. That's it, and it's not even 100% the same. It's always it would be differences, and so something else that they never take into account is that the the fossilized form is not the same species as the modern form. Um, Although the morphology may remain kind of the same, the genome must evolve based on the method of reproduction, sexual recombination. So there's still genomic evolution happening, but the morphology just remains stable. That's pretty much it.
Yeah, and they don't understand this. They don't seem to understand. Well, most of them at least don't understand like branching populations, like how one like or the core population can stay relatively stable while a part of that can branch off and become and acquire differences, or a lot more differences than the original population. Um, like, why would there still be apes and humans at the same time if we evolved from humans? It's because it's hard to explain this to them when they don't understand the basics. Like, why would the selection pressures be different from the same starting point? Well, the population can spread out and then be subject to different selection pressures. And part of the original population may stay in the same place that has the same population, same selection pressures, or the original place might the climate may change and everything and the pressures may change from there. All right.
So I hope everyone was able to hear that.
Yeah, if you
Yeah,
can
clear.
go forward again.
Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Okay.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Good. So he broke that down pretty simply. No reason to beat a dead horse on that one. So I should have reviewed PubMed study on that.
And to this day, it's so funny because Dr. Nathaniel Jensen, he gave more or less the same explanation in his 4-hour debate with Dr. Vanema from BioLogos. And what's funny is Cy Gard has admitted to me that Dr. Nathaniel Jensen won that debate. And I suggested, well, why don't you debate Dr. Nathaniel Jensen? Because Cy Gard scoffs. He scoffs at evolution deniers. And he even admitted that he would have to do some serious preparation to take on Dr. Nathaniel Jensen. And it's like, do these guys wonder why they're losing in these debates? It's because they're wrong and we're right. And Dr. Nathaniel Jensen, he's got predictions.
I mean, if you want to say who won or lost a debate, the creationists lost like hundreds of years ago when the prevailing theory was creationism, and they decided to drop that in geology and then later in biology. All the scientists were creationists before. I wonder why they changed their minds. Because the evidence is overwhelming. And the predictive power, actually, is one of the main reasons. Creationism wasn't able to make predictions. These newer methods were, so we switched over, and that's just how science works.
So these so-called wins he's talking about, that's why creation is like these where taking time to address it. They can, they kind of, one after the next. Let's say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, make 10 claims, and then they don't have time to address it. While the biologists, they're devised to, try to explain evolution to the audience they're talking to, and then at the same time try to, because you have to condense years of research into, like, I don't know, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour, and then still have to get time to rebut that those creationist arguments. So there's not enough time for that. So that's why, in my approach, I don't even waste time trying to explain evolution. I can't. It's like to try to explain evolution in 15 minutes or 20 minutes. So what I do is just to go directly to the arguments, the creationist arguments, and take down as much as I can. So that's pretty much my approach. Any debate I'm going to have, that's going to be the approach. If you want to learn about evolution, then Google it or go online, YouTube, whatever. But I don't think that they should waste time trying to explain evolution to a creationist, that they can just say common design or created heterozygous, because that's basically where creationist two arguments. All creationist arguments fall within those two brackets. It's either common design or created differences. So it always falls within those two brackets. So what my goal is to show these arguments up for what they are, and that's what I think the debate should be like now. Instead of trying to teach evolution, trying to summarize all these years of research, within a hour, hour and a half. It doesn't work, because that's semester's worth of work you're trying to summarize to teach the audience. Because usually when I look at these debates, the audience themselves are laymen and they don't know much about evolution. So you have to first teach them evolution, then you make the argument for evolution, and then you have to try to rebut the creationist arguments at the same time. That's too much to do in an hour debate. So what you can do is just straight to the creation.
Oh, you broke off for a second there. You still there? I'm not hearing you at all, but you're still connected. Yeah, I'm just gonna fill the dead air till you get back. I totally agree. I learned this pretty quickly through debating. Is you want to try and present your argument um, as fully as possible, but a lot of these people kind of already know what the argument is. That's why we're arguing over it. The creationists are pretty much responding to evolution. They already know the gist. Most of the audience who's interested in it already knows the gist. So yeah, I try to focus more on specific arguments, and that's one reason I definitely value discussion more over anything else. Over like the timed out formal debate, like you have an allotted time, 5 minutes opening, blah blah blah. I think that's more useful just for framing the argument, and then you can discuss from there. Let's see. Are we even still connected? I think the whole Zoom crashed. Oh, jeez. Nope, here it is. Here it is. I'm just done. He'll be coming back. Okay, anyway. I don't want to go on too far without him, but so let's just back up a little bit. Here he is. You're back.
Yeah,
You're back.
get back. How long was I out for, by the way?
Just a minute or two. I think you were. I forget what the last thing you were saying was, but you kind of cut off right in the middle of a sentence. You were just saying. I caught the part you were saying. It's just too much to try and explain to teach evolution in a semester's worth of work. You should just jump in. And I was trying to fill some dead air, just agreeing with that. I learned that pretty quickly just by debating.
Yeah, so basically, don't try to educate the audience, trying to teach the audience, then making the argument. Then I think it's too much to do within if you want, you can like direct people to go this way if you want to learn about evolution, and then you get directly to creationist arguments. Because what happens is the debates, it comes and it goes, and then like Standing for Truth, they would say, oh, no one could address my arguments. They couldn't address my opening or whatever. He usually says that. No one, they couldn't address my opening or whatever. So that's why I kind of tailored my presentation to tackle that opening he says I can't tackle. And well, here we are today tackling back their tackle.
Mm-hmm. And I think they should be honest and admit that they're always claiming we won this, we won that, but there is no amount of evidence that would convince them. They've in fact already stated that whatever evidence there is, they have to. It no matter what, it cannot contradict their faith, which they're going to consider as more important than any amount of evidence. I don't think anything would ever change their minds if we had 99% similarity with chimps and humans. The argument would just be the same. It would just be, well, similar parts for similar functions. So I mean, everyone thinks that their side won the debate. It's just that I think it's important to keep debating the creationists, even though it's I hesitate to call it science, but it's been a dead science for like hundreds of years. But it's important to keep addressing that because their arguments evolve, and it began as just kind of saying, well, evolution contradicts the Bible, and that used to be good enough for people because they held the Bible. Most people held the Bible as in full esteem, but we're a little bit more educated today, and so the creationist arguments have all been defeated, and so they had to change. They've completely stolen all the atheist and secular talking points. They call evolution a religion, as if that they think religions are bad. Um, but yeah, that's the point that they're at. We've pushed them that far as for them to start condemning something that they're basically advocating for. Still there? Oh no. I think we lost him again. Every time I go on a tirade, I lose him. Yep. Oh well. We'll make it work. I just have to keep talking and fill this silence with some more rants. Yeah, again, to address the Sygart comment, of course he's going to scoff because evolution denial requires what we've seen is complete misunderstanding or misrepresentation of the absolute basics of biology. And every single time I've seen a creationist cite something, it's been misrepresented. Hey there, you back?
Yeah.
Okay. I was just stalling for you a little bit.
Okay. The last part I got was when you're talking about the where they try to class evolution as a religion, as if a religion is somehow a bad
Yeah,
thing.
that was about it.
But regardless, even if it's a religion, though, how does it make it wrong?
Yeah, I mean that's their position. But yeah, just by virtue of something being a religion doesn't make it wrong. It's just it doesn't by virtue make it right either.
Hmm.
All right, should we play the video again?
Yeah, we can play another part of it.
Out, as you know, on speciation rates, which some have already been confirmed since we've seen in real time new species of finch arise from shifts from heterozygosity to homozygosity. And this was exactly predicted in the same way that Dr. Jensen did in replacing Darwin. He's given obviously mitochondrial DNA predictions on some of the African people groups, like really, really specific predictions too, future testable predictions.
These are actually not.
I don't think you're.
Sorry.
I don't think you're screen sharing.
Oh yeah, were you in silence?
No, I'm not seeing it.
Whoops.
Yeah.
He was just saying Dr. Jensen makes future testable predictions, stuff like that. I'll rewind it for you.
Predictions on DNA, obviously mitochondrial DNA predictions on some of the African people groups, like really, really specific predictions too, future testable predictions on DNA function. And it's funny because these evolutionists, like emotionally stunted Emoticon here, he never gives his own predictions. He can't make any real novel predictions.
They're literally looking at your prediction. But the predictions he's talking about are not actually specific to creationism, so I don't know why he counts them at all. They are made by a creationist, but not by any creationist model. These models can be done without any creationist assumptions.
And the thing is, one, he's asking me personally, to make a prediction, as if I'm a researcher or a trained biologist to be making predictions on evolution. He himself is not making any predictions. He is using Jensen's predictions, and then he wants me to personally make a prediction. He always does that during his debates. He would ask you to personally make a prediction, and I picked that up with him. So anytime I'm having a debate, and he does ask me to give my personal predictions, I mean, I don't have a problem giving them, but I want to ask him to give his personal predictions without using anything from Tompkins or Jensen or anybody else.
Yeah, that would be his standard.
Way we are, and it's just funny because you'll show them it over and over again, and yet they'll still come back and say, "Oh, creationists aren't making predictions," and it's like, here's prediction after prediction, and that explanation right there was perfect. I mean, it's irrefutable at the end of the day.
Yeah, and again, these are not creation specific predictions. They could be made by biologists without any creationist assumptions. They work while assuming creationism is false. So you have no predictions for
And
creationism.
I'm not saying that creationists don't make predictions. They do make, but they always ignore the data when they make the predictions. So when if you look at Jensen's work, where he's measuring the mitochondrial DNA differences within I think humans, fruit flies, some kind of worm, and something else. First of all, he's measuring the diversity, the differences at the species level or the genus level, not at the kind level. And um, what he's doing is, and it's strange because the mutation rates he is proposing it's kind of like he's kind of reverse engineering the formula. So it's basically what he's doing is he's taking the current diversity and then he is dividing it by how much years it would take to reach that time, and that's where he's getting the numbers from. So it would always fit. So first off, he's not even using the entire kind; he's just using the genus. Because that's you can. When I get a time, I'll go through the paper again. But he's not actually measuring the diversity within the kind itself. He's just using a genus within the kind, a genus of fruit flies or a species of fruit fly, and the variation in mitochondrial DNA. He is checking how long it would take to go from how long it would take to change in 6,000 years. So no matter what he does, it would always fit. It would always fit. It's like the same thing they do with the um, population growth and so on. They would take the current population and then divide it by the number of years it would take to go from here to here.
Okay.
So then it would always fit, obviously. You can't do that.
So he's assuming the 6,000 years in his calculations to prove that it happened in 6,000 years.
That's right. That's what
Of
he's doing.
course.
So it always fits. When I look at it, of course it fits because I realize. And then what he's doing is and here's what they do. So he's applying the calculations with a 6,000 year assumption, 6 to 10,000 year assumption, and then it fits. And then what he does is he uses same calculations now, just with a millions of years assumption or hundreds of thousands of years, and obviously it doesn't fit because what he did was he's kind of reverse engineering it. So let's say he with his calculations, you get like 2 mutations a year. Let's just say that, and in 6,000 years you would get um, 12,000 mutations, right? What he's doing is he's taking that 2 mutations a year, he just reverse engineered to get, and then applying it to evolution. So you know what? If you apply to evolution, you would get millions of mutations, and we don't see that. Of course not, because that number you got that from assuming it's 6,000 years, and then just dividing the current diversity by that 6,000 years, and you got that number as if that's the actual number. That's not actually the mutation rates because what he cites as the mutation rates doesn't doesn't line up with what he's proposing. They're way off. So I'm not too sure where he's getting numbers from. He has some numbers. I would make some slides on them because I would like to touch on that in my debate. So I would show exactly what I'm talking about. But I doesn't make the slides as yet.
And most mutations are going to quickly fall out of the population. So we're only seeing a small fraction of mutations that have actually uh, stuck and conserved in the population.
Nailed it. Exactly.
One
He's
quick
got
thing for Sandy for Truth. If you can get an icon for your thing, you can.
I guess I'm new to the. Okay, I'll do that. Lines and just like a lot of his labs, eh? Oh, edit avatar. Okay, I'll do that. I want to say one thing because I noticed like a lot of his ESCs first, a little bit there on kinds, and he questions, limited ancestry with what we believe in because he wants us to point to exactly what's related and what's not related. And what's funny is, I think it's within the past year or so, the massive study that came out that demonstrated that 90% of all life has literally the same level of genetic diversity, which means almost all life on Earth is the same.
Well, that's another misrepresentation. It just says that the current level of diversity for each species has arisen within the last 100 to 200,000 years.
What happens is they got it from I think the news tabloid.
Yep.
They took it, then because Biologos did a thing on it, and but I read the part of the original paper that was talking about that. So nowhere they're indicating that all species just suddenly arose 200,000 years ago. But what happened was the news tabloid took it, and they usually never get things right, so they misquoted what the paper was saying, and then creationists jump onto that tabloid instead of actually going to the original paper.
Yeah, that's why it's always important to go for the original source and not go through paraphrases and interpretations of like news sources or creationist sources. Even like you shouldn't even go through like scientific news sources that are reporting on it. You should read the actual paper itself.
Yeah, it's important to read the actual paper. Sometimes what I would do is what would happen is I would get like Science Daily. Science Daily, they do a good job at summarizing a paper. So if I'm arguing with someone and I need to cite something, now I can read the original paper would have the information, but as to if I want to like give a citation that's more digestible for the person I'm talking to, then I would use a more summarized version of it instead of just citing the entire paper.
Exactly.
But you
Same
have
age.
to always make sure that the source the summarized version you're giving is accurately representing the paper in question. You can't just because it says it's summarizing it, therefore you trust it. You need to read the original paper, then you read the summarized version to see if they have they got it on point, and then you can use it. That's fine. You can even use a YouTube video sometimes if they got it right, then you can use it because sometimes the video might have visuals accompanied by the thing you're talking about. So you can use those things as long as you fact check them and the original source. You need to do that before you cite it.
Yeah, I think a lot of people don't do that. A lot of people don't have the time because it's time consuming. So they do get reliant on certain sources. Um, but that's what fact checking is all about. You've always got to check.
Yeah, it does take a while to read some of those papers sometimes.
Yeah.
Age.
Yeah.
So that empirical evidence, because we use the empirical approach, and there's massive amounts of data.
Yeah, and that the empirical approach and that those data say that you know this happened on a time scale of 200 to like 100,000 years ago, which is I'm not great with math in my head, but that's over 10 times longer than 6,000 years.
Yeah, that's a lot more than what they believe in.
Mm.
But again, anything that contradicts evolution is good for them.
Yeah, they like to cherry pick parts out of the data and ignore these numbers, but the data is reliant on those numbers that they're ignoring.
Other than just this new research and new study that clearly shows boundaries. We can give, ways, whether it's through DNA function,
Pause there.
mitochondrial.
Yeah, what are these boundaries?
Right. So the boundaries are species boundaries. The author of the paper uh, so right basically a species is genetically isolated from another species, right? So that's the boundary they're talking about. That the genome, the genes are isolated from the other genes.
Mm-hmm.
That's the boundaries they're talking about. Genetic isolation, not the kind of boundaries between kinds, this mystic boundary they're talking about. No, it's the species boundary where the organisms become genetically isolated or genetically incompatible, so they can't exchange genes anymore. That's the boundaries they're talking about. That's the boundaries biologists always talk about, and they're talking about it on a species level, not the kind level, not this family level or the environment level. So he just gets it wrong again. He doesn't understand what they mean by boundaries. That's what they mean by
Yeah.
boundaries. They mean that the genes don't exchange anymore because of their inability to interbreed.
Yeah, that's completely different from the boundaries that we're talking about in the creation evolution debate, which is what is stopping this population from genetically changing, like however X much, because they won't actually say how much they can change, because that is actually the boundary that we're looking for in the context of this debate.
Well, no, they can't give a boundary because any imposed limitation on variation is actually an imposed limitation on God's ability to create. That's actually what's happening.
Yeah.
Because yeah, any limitation they give, any limitation they give, even though it's impossible, it's physically impossible, it's against God's ability to create. Because they would say when you point something out in the Bible and say, you know what, that's physically impossible. They say no, you can't limit God like that. But they would tell you that certain things are physically impossible with species. Why? Why couldn't God just make it possible? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Even if God was basically guiding evolution the whole way, that still seems like a greater being, a grander plan than, you know, kind of the Pokemon style. Just he just made a few of them and just let them go, kind of thing. Like a being that can plan out evolution or guide evolution. That seems like a uh, greater being. I mean, that's how they define God, as the greatest possible being. Typically, is how it's defined, and so a God that's just mixing and matching parts, even though we see that it's mixed and matched in this nested hierarchies, that's a lesser God than a God that can devise evolution either as a guided process or an unguided, or not necessarily unguided, but as a natural process.
Yeah, so they actually they don't know they don't know that they're doing it, but they're actually limiting their God by imposing limits on His creation.
Yeah, like
That's what they
he
keep
can
doing.
make any miracle happen. Anything that's impossible, according to them, is actually possible with God. So anytime they say, well, genetics can't possibly create new genes or anything, well, that's saying that God can't do that.
Correct. Basically, they're saying that God couldn't make animals to create new genes or new anatomical features or to diversify beyond what they conceive as a kind.
Because what if God just gave new genes to these populations that he wanted to evolve? That's a possibility.
Yeah, but you see, because they want to deny evolution, they don't want to, accept that possibility, that reality. They don't want to accept that.
Yeah, that's what a lot of religion and faith-based things are. It's really just what they want to be true.
DNA differences, for example, to show what is and what isn't related. But this study does prove that there are boundaries, that universal common ancestry is not true. And it's so funny because their rescue device that in this study to explain those results that clearly demonstrate limited ancestry and boundaries in the genome is that they said that somehow life got nearly wiped out across the board within this time frame of 100,000 to 200,000 years ago, and then had to restart. That's literally their explanation
No,
for the
no, no, no.
Nope.
That's not what that's what the news tabloid did. That's what it did. That's what they were suggesting, but that's not what the paper was saying. The paper was saying that they came from, obviously they had ancestors and so on. I actually read the paper itself. When you the I forgot the I have the PDF version, but the site I got it from, I don't know if I have the link for it. It has a disclaimer that says you do not support any catastrophic event or whatever. It says that in a disclaimer. The authors actually placed a disclaimer on the paper.
Yeah, it's just talking about, whenever there is a branching event, it is kind of like a bottleneck because the whole population doesn't typically branch. That can happen, but it could happen with just a smaller part of the original population. And it's just beautifully ironic that SFT has such a problem with population bottlenecks when that's literally his entire theory, is that there was this massive arc that contained the most extreme possible bottleneck. Like, you can't get more extreme than just two single two individuals as a breeding pair. You just can't get a smaller bottleneck than that.
data that has come out from this research. And I don't think I have to tell Praise or Matt that that's nothing more than an ad hoc explanation. They have no historical evidence. They have no geological evidence. They have no DNA evidence. So exactly what ESE wants is what we have just given. The fact that there are clear genetic boundaries pointing to limited ancestry and not universal common ancestry. And we're doing it with genetics. Traits are inherited, not bones found in the dirt, but traits.
I love this. Bones are traits. Bones themselves are traits of an organism, and bones have traits, and these traits are all controlled by genetics. So I just don't understand this.
What I really want to personally ask Standing for Truth is, who gives him the authority to dismiss fossils all of a sudden? Who is he? Because Standing for Truth is not even a person. I don't know who he is. He doesn't have a name, or you don't know his real name. I don't know his qualifications. I don't know anything about him. But then he comes around and then dismisses the work of people who have spent lifetime studying these things. Just dismisses as bones in the dirt.
Yeah, and as if the instructions for these bones are not inherited.
Nailed it. Matter of fact, I just
they can't actually. Yes, they can't actually give an actual argument as to why the bones don't count. So just have to dismiss it out of hand. Just bones in the dirt. That's simple. You don't have to make an argument. You have to publish anything to refute any transitional forms or anything. Just call them bones in the dirt. That's the same thing Kent Hovind does. They're just bones in the dirt. Fine. You don't have to make any argument.
Yeah, it's just a way to dismiss.
I don't have time for that because they have to prove themselves for it. If I'm not saying that these experts might not be wrong, But obviously, it's going to take much more than just what you just said to convince me that they're wrong.
Yeah, it's like saying like it's like a flat earther saying like satellites are just little sparks in the sky, or the rocket program. It's just a big stick with fire on the end. Like that doesn't actually address anything.
Well, they can't address it. That's why they say
Yeah.
it.
Posted that study from physics.org in the comment section for everybody to read if they want to check it out. And it's the Canadian microbiologist called Paul Herber that actually coined the term DNA barcoding. And he's the one that identified by the analysis called COI genes. And by this, he looked at the mitochondrial snippets and distinguished there's clear genetic boundaries between species. And he said they're very visible that you can see. And so that's exactly what he was talking about when he said that's the way to distinguish between what is a created kind, what isn't. We
Well,
Oh,
no, yeah.
no.
That's either talking about like alignment or just there are obvious boundaries between the species. We can tell there are differences, but that doesn't say that there's a boundary in the sense that they can't further change or they can't change in a certain way.
Right. So, and the paper clearly said species, right? And they clearly explain that they were talking about genetic isolation. That's what they were pretty much talking about, right? So, gene pools are genetically isolated from other gene pools. That's the boundary you're talking about, and they don't exchange genes anymore. But he takes the boundary because he hears boundaries, so and then says kinds. But nowhere in the paper is talking about kinds or environments or families, just species, and how gene pools are isolated from other gene pools. That's it.
And there can be clear geographic boundaries where we can say that these types of genes tend to cluster in this geographic area and a different type of gene clusters in this geographic area. And those are clear boundaries, but it's not a boundary to evolution. It's just a boundary in the sense that there are different locations, there are just differences. It doesn't limit how much the differences can add up though.
Right. It's not the same kind of boundary they're talking about.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's not the same kind of boundary. The boundaries they're talking about is wholly undefined, never been observed. Yeah, I don't know, because they never actually say exactly what the boundary is to delineate kinds. They don't say. And again, some of you talking about, genetics. He would never explain to you how they use genetics to identify kinds.
Yeah. They can't show us how. They just say that it is, but there's no how, there's no method. And I mean, one of the problems with layman to science is that the, you know that or dishonest actors is they tend to use the equivocation fallacy, where the same word they see the same word, but and they say that they're being used in the same manner, but they are actually being used in different manners. All right.
Yeah. So compare a little bit more. Let's see what happens.
know that they have speciation differences. So, like you said, that's exactly what he wanted to know. And that's secular science, by the way. No link. Okay, that's probably because I'm blocked or something with this account.
Just like you said, Matt, we're literally using observed mutation rates. We're using the empirical method, and we're looking at these molecular clocks. And not only in this study with the genetic boundaries, with the limited genetic diversity that was seen, as you know, there's been other research involving the genetic analysis of fruit flies, humans, roundworms, and water fleas, and the molecular clocks, the absolute DNA differences within these animals are in line with dates within the biblical time frame of 6,000 years. Therefore, once again, proving limited ancestry. And there's only been genetic analyses like this on just a few different species. So once again,
I mean, I guess he's just using Nathaniel Jensen for the 6,000 years, but all the empirical data other than that says much longer time scales than 6,000 years.
Right. So again, how he did the calculation, it must fall within that range. It will always fall there because what he's not actually measuring the diversity within a kind. He just does it with a species. And let me see if I can get that actual quote there because I had it quoted.
So he must be using the 6,000 years as a given and not a variable, which, kind of allows us to throw that out because if you assume the conclusion before you begin, that's not really a confirmation. What are you trying to pull up?
Let me see. Yeah, I was trying to get what he actually used, but what he was using is just the um the genus. He was not actually measuring the diversity within a kind. And I mean, if he measures the diversity within the genus and it falls to 6,000 years, if he then expands it to the family, then obviously the time would have to go back to accommodate the differences.
Mm.
But then I remember he said in the paper what he was saying is that God may have made multiple, individuals in the beginning. So I guess each genus would represent a group within the kind. So God created kinds, like a large population of kinds, and not just two, because the ones he was talking about, the roundworms and all that, there are not kinds on the ark. The only ones that were on the ark is the humans, and the other ones, what he was saying, he was arguing that God could have. There's a lot of God could have in that article, by the way. God could have created multiple varieties of them, and each genus would represent like a variety within the kind, though.
Yeah, and I don't. So I think they're doing it backwards. So like the normal way to use empirical molecular clocks is to take the known mutation rate and the number of mutations, um, and basically see how long that takes. And what they're doing is starting with how long it takes and seeing how many mutations have to happen within that time frame.
Right. So they're doing it backwards. So it must fit. It doesn't matter what they do, it's going to fit.
Yeah.
And Dr. Jensen has made predictions based on the data we have here on these species on thousands of other species. And guess what? The data's out there. The evolutionists can make the same predictions. Their only explanation is going to have to be natural selection did it. Maybe natural.
Is what he's referring to in that paper that we were talking about by Jensen?
I'm sorry.
Are those predictions that he's talking about? Is that in the paper that that you linked me earlier that we were talking about?
I don't think it's in the paper itself. I think the paper itself is like the last part of his book that was made into the
Because
paper.
I
don't think the prediction.
I keep asking SFT for citations on what exactly Jensen is predicting, and all I get is, well, I've given it to you before, so I don't have to give it to you now. Clearly, I don't have it.
Yeah, because
so
I don't think he actually reads the papers themselves. So you can't. I don't think he actually reads through the papers themselves. Because there are many times I would ask him for a citation, and he would. There was once he cited me an abstract, right? But the abstract was to a paper that was it was not a public paper. So you just get the abstract, and you need to log in, and I think be part of the university or wherever that paper was from. So I said, why did you cite me a paper that you'd have no access to? Did you read the paper? And he didn't answer me. He didn't give me an answer. He obviously didn't read the paper because he cited an abstract.
yeah,
Because the heading of the paper said something. The heading of the paper said something that he thinks agrees with him. And not even the abstract agrees with him, but usually I don't want to cite an abstract. I want to cite the entire paper. So I asked him to, well, just you know, give me the entire paper. He couldn't do it because the paper itself doesn't exist free online. So there is no way for him to get past the abstract unless he's part of the university. Some university would allow access to the papers,
Yeah, and
or you got to
the
pay for it.
abstract is at least within the paper itself and not some third party source, but it's really just a summary, and sometimes is misleading. So
Yeah, just like a briefing, not even a summary, just like a preamble to what's to come in the
yeah,
paper.
yeah. Sometimes it doesn't address the
Yeah.
paper. It just says, here are some problems that we have, and then later the paper addresses those problems exactly, and they'll use the abstract, the setup, basically, to say, well, this is all the paper says.
Right. Like when Neff cites a paper, 80% of what is it? 80% of human genes are different than chimp or something.
Yeah.
You remember that
Yep. And
paper?
it turns
Yeah.
out that
But that's just the heading of the
yep,
paper.
turns out that there's only one or two nucleotide differences in 80% of those, and I think the remaining 20% are identical.
Yeah, the remaining so the 80% is different by a factor of 1 to 2%, and then the other 20% is different. Well, it's identical.
Yeah.
It's the same thing when they cite the paper. Why um why aren't we dead 100 times over
Yeah.
by Contrasoft? But the point of the paper is to explain why we haven't. But they always cite there's a heading of the paper because it sounds interesting.
Yeah. But but they actually solved the problem in the paper.
You're right. They solved the problem in the
That
paper.
Kent does that with the lunar recession stuff. He'll cite a paper where they solve the problem,
You know,
but he'll just cite the earlier part of the paper.
yeah. I never saw that paper before. Do you actually have it?
I
Because he talks about it, but he never gives.
Yeah, I have it somewhere. I'll have to dig it up. I was
Okay.
working on some lunar
Because
regression
usually,
stuff, so
oh, I see.
yeah. But I'll find it and
Because
give it to you.
usually, okay. So what I was saying is that usually when scientists, especially scientists from before, like in Darwin's time, what they would do is they would ask a question in the paper and then address a question, right? So they would bring up the problem themselves in the paper and then rebut it in the same paper. That kind of style they used to do back then. And that's where we get creationist quote mining papers and so on, where Darwin would say something that would sound contradictory to evolution, but what he's doing is bringing up the question, and then he's explaining it in the same paper, in the same book. And some scientists still do that today, and creationists they love to leap on that when they hear a scientist
Yeah.
ask a question about evolution. Yeah.
Selection, rid the genome of these DNA differences. If that's their explanation, in order for it to not be ad hoc, they need to make some testable predictions, and they haven't. So in the realm of empirical science, they're failing. And empirical science, as we're demonstrating here, is
I
demonstrating.
don't know how he can say we haven't made any testable predictions. Obviously, I mean, that's how we find fossils. This is how we predict the behavior of diseases. Um, I mean, just going into geology, we can predict what's going to be where, like just for resource acquisition, just finding coal, finding diamonds, finding any natural resource in the rocks. We make testable predictions for that.
the thing about the genetic predictions he's talking about, with DNA function and so on, evolution actually predicted that the quote unquote junk DNA would have function long before any creationists predicted it would have function. The thing is, and they also predicted what functions it would have, what type of functions it would have. I would have to get the you know what? That's something I think I would do next week, is to get the exact predictions they make on the exact functions the junk DNA would have, and the dates they made the prediction.
Yeah.
And then what I would do is to challenge Standing for Truth to tell me, okay, you said that creationists predicted functions. Tell me what function they predicted and give me the date they made that prediction.
Yeah, and one of the functions of the junk DNA is actually to absorb mutations and to provide extra material for like de novo or orphan genes, which seem to come out of nowhere. But really, I mean, you can mutate the junk DNA, and it usually has no effect on the organism, which we know because of knockout experiments. We can knock out most of it, but the function would be more multi-generational, where most of the mutations are occurring in the junk DNA, and it also provides this extra material. Like, I forget where I heard the analogy, but it's like a junk drawer. It's got like this extra just stuff that you keep around because it might be useful one day.
Right, and that's the point. They don't get I guess the name is a name that gets to them.
Yeah.
Junk DNA never meant functionless DNA. That I don't know why they don't get it. Junk is just junk. It doesn't mean it's useless, but it may not have as much function as something else, but it doesn't mean it's useless. No one said it was. It's like vestigial structures. No one says or said it was useless. It's just lacking original function.
Yeah.
But creations and definitions, they don't get it.
Trading limited ancestry. It's exactly what ESE wants. And I know you hammered down the heirloom plants and then all the examples he was putting there earlier. You demolished it. So great job there, Matt.
Thanks. Well, we're going to answer everything, so
Try putting that link there now. For some reason, I don't think you were a mod.
Oh, no problem.
Oh, stop there.
And so when you see there are two.
Yes, he was saying that he hammered down the heirloom plants. He was talking about the tomatoes and so on.
Mm.
He didn't hammer down anything. I made him accept that. That's my doing. That's not his doing.
Yeah.
Normally creationists don't accept it, but when I explain that they can graft, then he accepted it. That's what made him accept it.
Yeah, and then he says that he also said that you can accept it just because they all have this one same gene.
Yeah, that's when he was talking about the palm trees. They have the same. Oh right, we're talking about them. They had a specific gene, and because they all share that one gene, they're related. That's basically it. And that's the same thing they object to, using one trait.
Yeah. But I still don't. If you can accept that, I think they just think of plants differently. Like obviously they'll always move the goalposts and they'll never accept human evolution. But I do think they see plants as more flexible than animals for some reason, as if because he admitted that they're all related and yet they look completely different. So to me, that meets the definition of macroevolution. Now they'll never give a definition for macroevolution because then we can meet it with something like that. But yeah, I think they just think plants are more flexible.
No, here's what happens. The more distantly related the organism is to humans, the more different it is from a human being, the less emotional attachment they have to it.
Yeah.
So then they can accept as much diversity as, yeah. So they would accept, for example, like with plants, they would accept a lot of variation within plants. Bacteria, a creation would accept that all bacteria is related, even though bacteria is entire domain, because they are so dissimilar from humans. It's easy for them to accept it. There is no emotional attachment. But as soon as you start coming up with, like, for example, apes and so on, if you look at the ape kinds, they're usually very small compared to the other kinds. The more distantly related the thing is, the bigger the kind is. The reptiles would have these big kinds and so on. Well, I mean, it's true that these things they speciate more than mammals do, but the creationists would digest variation within reptiles easier than variation within, like primates or whatever. Like how raw mat accepts, for example, the bamboo and the grasses and so on. He accepts that, right? I made him do that because they're within the same family. But he had no problem accepting it. Usually, a creationist would say, "Well, no, they're not the same kind," but he just accepted it because they're grasses. You know,
Yeah. Yeah, that's a very good point. It's so far from humans, it's not threatening to them. Like, but
yeah,
there's this astounding amount of variation between the kinds that they accept, and then when you look at apes and humans, the amount of variation is tiny compared to the amount of variation that they accept, and like the difference between humans and chimps is much smaller than the difference between chimps and gorillas, and yet they they accept a much larger uh, grouping of variation in other species. So what is the difference there, and why? Like typically, I don't know of any creationists who would say that a gorilla can't be related to a chimp, although I'm sure they would make that argument. Um, but then why are they more distantly related than chimps and humans are? And why is there, there's just this lack of variation uh, within the human kinds and the ape kinds when they accept so much bigger variation? It's totally inconsistent. And of course, they have to limit God in order to say that.
yeah. If you look at any when they have the bush of life or whatever, they have the what do you call it, the orchid or creationist orchid. The human line is always a straight line representing one species.
Yep.
That's it. That's one straight line. Everything else branches and speciates. And but you see now, the reason why they have to have that straight line, because as soon as you want to, the things that you would have to include in the branching would be apes,
Yep.
but you can't be related to apes. So the reason that's why we have that straight line, because they're not related to apes, and there's nothing else to really. There's no other human. Well, there's not much human species per se. They would just classify those human species as subhumans, so that's why they just have the straight line.
Yep.
200,000 year number in that study. Remember, they inferred it with a fossil record. Remember, 200,000 years ago is their supposed bottleneck. That's what they.
Yeah, I mean, we called it. Matt doesn't understand molecular clocks. It's not. They're not inferring it at all from the index fossils or the age of the rocks. They're literally just taking the mutation rate and the amount of mutations. And since we know the rate and the amount, you know how long it's been going for. And that's empirically longer than the oldest young Earth creationist estimate.
They need for that to work. So that's when that occurred. That's when primitive man went in and modern day came out.
So-
Nothing but ad hoc. And maybe we should put that link to that article that I.
And they constantly think that these things occur in one step. Like we were in the chat earlier today, I forget who was saying it, but they were saying, so heart, lungs, blood vessels, they all evolved all at once, all conveniently, all together. And it's like, they don't just go into this machine and mix up and then come out something different. Of course, as soon as you say it's gradual, they'll act like they know that they're with the program, that evolution is slow and gradual, but they don't actually argue as if that's something that they understand.
No, they don't understand it because what they look when they look at they look at the modern species, all its parts, and think that that has to come about in one step. That pretty much they can't conceive of. I'll tell you what happens. So they look at a human and they would say, you know what, a human needs a heart, they need a lung, and they need that. How can that come about? They can't conceive of, that humans evolved from things that didn't have those things, that they were that you didn't always need those things, because they only look at the thing in its modern form. That's where irreducible complexity comes from. They look at the thing in its modern state, and they look at it and say, you know what, if we remove the heart from this, from the human would die. Therefore, humans need hearts to live, and therefore hearts couldn't evolve, or lungs couldn't evolve, or whatever. Because if you remove it from the modern species, and it obviously would cease to exist, the species would die. So that's how they look at it, and that's the whole argument of irreducible complexity, where they look at a modern something, and they would try to remove a part, and if it doesn't function, therefore that part couldn't have evolved stepwise. But no, they're looking at it all backwards, because that's not how evolution works. Things become irreducibly complex when fish have gills, and there are some of them with gills and lungs, so they have them side by side. And then there are fishes with gills, lungfish. They have the gills, but it's kind of vestigial, where they don't actually breathe through the gills. They just use the lungs. Um, so you can see that you can have both of them, then you lose one for one, and that's how you get lungs without gills, and then you become dependent on lungs.
Yeah, they don't seem to understand how you can develop dependencies that weren't needed previously. Like I think one of Matt's favorite examples is the bees and the flowers, as if some plants can't reproduce without bees. It's just that the ones that
Right.
started getting better reproduction with cooperation with bees became completely reliant on that because there's no need to keep reproducing the old way when you have this better new way. And so that is one way evolution works through loss of function, while at the same time it is gaining another function.
Yeah. So I heard him use that argument even with Aaron Ra, but Aaron Ra nailed it. Basically, he doesn't get the that plants could pollinate by wind as well. All right, there are some that can pollinate by wind, some can pollinate by both wind and insects, and then there are some that are just become dependent on the insects. So that's basically how it evolved. Anyways, they just become dependent on the insects. So he doesn't get that part, because they have this thing where once it's dependent on this thing, they can't conceive of it, evolving. They have this kind of straight line evolution thing in their head. They can't see that things can, you can gain stuff, you can lose stuff, and then you become dependent on stuff gradually. They can't see that.
Yeah, and I said same time, and what I really mean is it's still an extended period of time. It's the slow processes are happening simultaneously over a long period of time. It's not the same instant or the same generation or the same breeding period.
Yeah, that's all. It's like, for example, I was trying to explain it to someone with human technology. Let's say we remove all human technology today. What would happen to human beings? We have become so dependent on it. Many people would die.
Hmm.
Like the entire population could go extinct off of that. Off of, I mean, most of it. Let's say um, obviously the developed countries and so on. Many people would die of starvation and all that, because They've become so dependent on technology. But this doesn't happen overnight. Gradually, over generations, humans become more dependent on technology. So it maybe could be a point where in our evolution where we become so dependent on it that it becomes like irreducible complexity. That could happen.
Right. Good example. Because we've lost. I mean, we can regain the ability to like have primitive technology, but we've lost that. It's been replaced slowly and surely, and if it was suddenly taken away, we wouldn't be able to just fall back on the old methods because we haven't been using them.
Right. So exactly.
Use it or lose it. It applies to evolution as well. If you're not using a certain feature, if it's not under selection pressure, then they say genetic entropy, but it's really genomic decay, will take over. It will fall apart because you're not strengthening it through any process.
This genetic entropy is something else because anything is actually genetic entropy. It doesn't matter what it is, as long as you lose something. Obviously, if you change from one to the next, you would lose what you had previously. Even that is considered genetic entropy. So you evolve. They would say that dinosaur birds evolving from dinosaurs is genetic entropy because they lost their teeth and all that. So that somehow birds are less than dinosaurs because they're smaller and they don't have teeth and the big muscles again. So I don't know because anything for creation is genetic entropy. Humans evolving from apes, it's also genetic entropy because even raw matter would tell you that we have lost so much muscles and strength and so on compared to an ape. That's genetic entropy.
And we've lost some genes that actually keep the brain small, which means that the brain will grow bigger.
Right. That's genetic entropy. If you lose genes, that's genetic entropy. Anything that is lost, that's genetic entropy. Evolution of the horse, you lose some toes, genetic entropy. Evolution of the whale, genetic entropy. Even the evolution of fish to land animal is genetic entropy because you lost the gills to become terrestrial. So it doesn't matter what, it's genetic entropy. So that's why um, in my um, in my argument, I was saying that creationism is actually no different from evolution. They can't actually distinguish creationism from evolution.
Well, I mean, they need evolution to explain creationism.
And they needed a great deal.
Yeah.
And Aronov said something a long time ago, but it just recently I was thinking about it, that any theory that replaces evolution would look just like it.
Yeah. How so?
Well, the thing is, the evidence that, okay, for example, Newton's theory of gravity, his it was replaced by Einstein's general relativity, right?
Mm-hmm.
But general relativity is not so much so different than Newton's theories, albeit that Einstein could explain more things, but it's not so much so different. You can still use Newtonian physics to get things done in the same way you can use um, general relativity. Just the thing is, there's obvious limitations to Newtonian physics. So if a theory replaces evolution, the evidence for evolution remains there. It doesn't go away. They would have to explain it, and it would look very similar to evolution. It would be no different. That's why the creations have to include so much evolution into their models. So even if creationism replaced evolution, it would look very similar to it, where it sometimes become indistinguishable from what evolution it was.
Yeah, it would essentially just be modifying or refining what we already know. And rarely in
Right.
science is something just completely overturned and rejected. I mean, other than creationism. But that wasn't really much of a model in the first place.
I sent you earlier in the day, Matt, where it talks about the anatomically modern human-looking footprints that were found. I think it was dated
Again, only half anatomically modern.
5.7 million years old.
Yeah.
But what's funny is that finding alone, and this debunks what he was saying about the human ancestors and his suggestion to go see, Bill Ludlow's video. It literally proves that humans predate the supposed Australopithecine ancestors, right?
So he's saying that these footprints are human, even though they belong to the skeletons of. Not only were the feet not human, but the skulls and the rest of the skeleton were not.
And listen how he says it. Anytime Stanley Richards says something, I would have to do that too. But you would have to make a video though. Anytime he makes an argument, I would get the timestamp for you and show you how he makes the argument and how the person he's taking it from says it. He says it word for word. So when he says that, just rewind the tape like 10 seconds.
Bill Ludlow's video. It literally proves that humans predate the supposed Australopithecine ancestors, right? So like Lucy and Sid.
Pause that there. Now remember the slide I showed you with him talking about the. Let's see if I can get that slide again.
I've still got them up.
Oh, right. I think, right. Let me see. So the findings suggest that humans significantly predate. No, I think you changed it.
Oh, you want this one?
Oh, let me see. No, yeah. The next one, the orange one. Yeah. Predate or reputed Australopithecine ancestors. Okay, so he didn't really say it word for word there, but when he says things like there's something he was saying about, I think it was a virus, he said went from a hot pandemic to a whimper to an extinction event. That's the exact same way Sanford said it. Exact same way. When he talks about human chromosome 2 fusion, and he says there is a functional gene that spans the fusion site, and there's a lack of he said a cryptic centromeric region or something. So he said something like that. He said, but it's exactly how Purdom said it. Anytime he said something, the argument is always word for word from whoever he took it from, and the response is also the same way too. For example, when he asks you, I remember he asked you about could a dog become as big as an elephant because we have animals as big as an elephant, like an elephant. That's the exact same thing Kent Hovind says.
Yeah.
And he takes it from word for word. He just takes the argument word for word, and whatever responses Kent has for whatever objection you may have to his arguments is the same thing he uses. So he uses the arguments and the objections, and that's why if you challenge him on something that let's say Jensen, let's say he uses one of Jensen's arguments. If you challenge his argument and Jensen didn't have an answer to it, like usually Jensen would write blogs and answer objections. If there is no objection to the question you ask, he won't be able to answer it because he doesn't know how to defend the argument himself. All he knows is to copy the argument and copy whatever objections to the argument people have.
Yeah, creationists, they kind of just copy paste from each other around, and it just becomes like incestuous. And a lot of it never actually comes from a scientific source, just other creationists. Like the phosphate rock book. Matt will quote verbatim from this article from like Genesis Park or something, which it it's not accurate at all to what the book actually says. But his conception is filtered from the Genesis Park article and not from actually reading the book.
It's the same thing with the his when he was talking about the petroglyph with the dinosaur. It came word for word from the blog, from the blog he got it from. I don't even know who exactly wrote the blog. It doesn't say who, but it's just a blog, and it's strange because when I was asking him, well, why didn't first he couldn't give me the citation for the person doing the original work of the person doing the shading. Second, he couldn't explain why the shading was so localized. He couldn't explain that. Third, he couldn't explain why this expert missed the second dinosaur he was talking about that was intersecting the first one. So because the tail of the second dinosaur, the alleged second dinosaur, intersects the first dinosaur. So they're actually one on top of the other. How could this expert totally miss the second dinosaur? But he was saying that the evolutionists, when they came, they took a binoculars from a distance and they look at the dinosaur and they missed the dinosaur. Okay, fine, they missed it. But you say that your expert went up to the drawing and shaded the dinosaur. How come they also missed the second dinosaur? It doesn't make sense.
Yeah, and there was no shading outside of the dinosaur shape either.
Yeah, the shading is too localized to the dinosaur itself. Like it's someone drawing, and if you look at it closely, it doesn't actually match up with the petroglyphs. The curvature and so on of it is different. You can look at it and see that the legs. I think the legs are a bit more separated and so on. It's not the same thing. Like if someone actually drew that thing.
And they add a little.
Usually those shading,
they add a little like smiley face in too. Very scientific.
And they add a smiley face. That's not in the drawing.
Yeah.
That person is laughing at Creationist.
But the audience loves it because he says expert.
Right. He says an expert will want to do it. But the person he's talking about is actually a real person that does these things. But he can't show me the original work of them doing that specific thing.
Yeah.
And he said that they were hired by a Canadian government. Just Canadian government. That's it. It doesn't say who. It doesn't say why. Why would the government? I don't know. They just hired this person, a Canadian government, hired the person, and they just, but the person totally missed the second petroglyph. And usually those shadings, they shade the entire thing, and then they would get the outline of the object from the shading. You shading. That's like how you do a coin. You have a coin on the paper, you shade, you shade everything, and then you would see the outline of the coin. All right, but the shading is never localized to the coin as if you drew the coin yourself.
Yeah, it seems like it's missing some information there.
Yeah, and that's why he couldn't cite me anything other than the blog. Well, as a matter of fact, he didn't actually cite me the blog. I found the blog and I posted in the video, under the video, and I asked him if he can give me the original citation, because that's the only thing I can find for it is the blog, because I kind of took a sentence he said. I said, let me type in the sentence. They normally don't put citations, and I couldn't see exactly where he got it from, so I kind of typed in a sentence he said, and I got that. I said, okay, nice.
Yeah, I find all kinds of blogs that say things that I want to be true, but anyone can just say anything.
The Deba and Habilis and Ardipithecus, for example, all these other hominin species, it's impossible for them to be our ancestor. Because if these human-looking footprints are found and dated, 5.7 million years ago, well, at the end of the day, that just disproves it right there. And I remember Bill Ludlow asking that question too, right? Is there any evidence of humans in layers lower than these so-called pre-humans? There you go. And
he died the day before it came out. Figures.
Yeah, and all these so-called hominin species like Naledi and Erectus, and you can go on and on, the hobbits, for example, all clearly human. inbred human. Like there's zero transitional forms that they can point to.
How does he know that they're human without comparative anatomy?
Yeah, that's the point. That's what they're using.
Between
the thing is,
Australopithecus.
He does what he said. Australopithecines are apes, and then the Homo are humans. But who was doing it? Who was doing the classification? It's evolutionists that did that classification. They placed Australopithecines as Australopithecines, and the humans as humans. There was a fossil I don't know was mentioning that it's currently unresolved. Let me see. It's neither a some paleontologists would classify it within Homo, and others would classify it within. Oh no. Am I on?
Yeah. Sorry, I just accidentally closed it.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. So let me see if I can get that there. I'll get the video classification. 2 days ago. Yeah, I just want to get the species in question there. Yeah, it's Homo platyops. It's HOMO PLATYOPS.
Platyops? I don't know.
Platyops. Yeah. You know about that fossil?
I don't think so. I might have looked at it before. Let me see. What's what's the significance of that one, other than it just being a transitional?
It's if you go to you can go to the Wikipedia page if you like, but it's classified sometimes as Homo and sometimes as Australopithecus.
Oh yeah.
So it's in between.
Yep. And it's
So I like to know where he classified.
And it's interesting. Your audio is a little bit. You sound muffled.
Hold on. Is that better?
A little bit.
All right.
But it's interesting how there's this very gradual change going on towards humans and not away from humans, if you put them in the correct order.
Anthropocene and humans. There's two separate categories. Like they're looking for created kinds. Okay, humans. And then your Australopithecines or your apes. Like there's your two separate created kinds. Man was clearly created uniquely and in the image of God. And we've got fossil evidence to prove this and DNA evidence to prove this. So ESE doesn't really have anything else to stand on, to be honest with you.
I mean, what evidence does he have that they're inbred other than that that's just how it fits in his model? It seems like they're getting closer and closer to humans as you go up.
Yeah, he doesn't have any evidence for that. I doubt he would ever give a citation for that. Yeah, he wouldn't give a citation. But the same article where I quoted in orange, they said that they are inbred humans. They just mentioned them and said they were inbred humans, but they didn't give any evidence. They just said that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I
Oh,
don't know
but
what to do with
this
that.
Goes on a lot more, man.
How many minutes are we in, brother?
Probably 3, 4.
Oh, really? Okay, let's keep her going then. Let's keep her going.
And Tompkins doesn't even have an argument to make. If they have a different number of chromosomes, they can't be related. Usually creationists use this again to try to distinguish humans from apes, and what they would say is that you can't use a chromosome, or chromosome number would cause the detriment of the species. Now, I don't even know where to begin to take this argument seriously when you look at the kind of chromosome number variation creationists accept in the name of a kind. The Y chromosomes are way too different. They can't be related. Now, this is an argument from Stand for Truth. He had a debate a couple months ago. Kerry says, quote, "The extensively and remarkably different DNA sequence of the Y chromosomes between humans and chimps presents a very serious problem for common ancestry. Given the low level of recombination and DNA sequence diversity on the Y chromosome, the human and chimp Y chromosome should be considerably more similar to each other," end quote. Here we have another quote from Science Daily. They say, quote, "The results overturned the expectation that the chimp and human Y chromosomes would be highly similar. Instead, they differ remarkably in their structure and gene content. The chimp Y, for example, has lost 1/3 to 1/2 of the human Y chromosome genes, a significant change in a relatively short period of time," end quote. Now, in isolation, these quotes make it seem like if Standing for Truth has an argument to make, but as we would see, he has nothing of the kind. All that's happening here is, although the observation was, it went against the expectation of the biologists, it is totally consistent.
Okay, so one of the main reasons why evolutionists in general were so interested and intrigued in comparing the Y chromosomes that he's talking about, because he's using one of my direct arguments, the reason why they were so interested in that is because of the fact, and ESC would even agree with this because this is a genetic fact, is that very little variation, which is associated with recombination, occurs in that area of the genome compared to all the other chromosomes. So that just means that it's a very stable chromosome, and it should be, according to evolution, the least changed or evolved since the time of their hypothetical human to ape evolutionary split. Okay, they say it happened, I think, between 4 and 6 million years ago or something. But the thing is, for one, all human Y chromosomes are incredibly similar, proving that we all came from, what the evolutionists would call Y chromosome Adam, but there's no evidence that there was any other humans associated with this Adam. It was, the Adam of the Bible. And when they actually sequenced this chromosome and found out just how different it is to a chimpanzee Y chromosome, it was not expected. They were surprised. And even in the paper, they said that was talking about this, because the differences between the human and chimp Y chromosomes were so great. The authors of that paper said the difference in male-specific region gene content in chimpanzee and human is more comparable to the difference in autosomal gene content in chicken and human at 310 million years of separation. Like, literally, that was how much of a failed expectation it was when they sequenced it. So it's not just that form of evidence. We have other forms of evidence as well, proving that.
So I don't know what he's talking about. I mean, the Y chromosome is much more unstable than the other chromosomes, so I don't know why he's claiming that they're the most stable.
Yeah, I'm not too sure we got the argument that it should be more stable, but when I quoted the Science Daily article, they was quoting another article too, but basically I was acknowledging that the discovery was a bit, off from what was expected, right? So I have already acknowledged that, but then he's going on about how they didn't expect that and whatever. That's what I just said. So you're just repeating what I just acknowledged instead of actually getting to my actual argument now, which would be the next part of what I was saying. So my argument is, his argument was the chromosomes are way too different, so therefore they can't be related. Pretty much, it doesn't match common ancestry. Fine. And my argument was to show him organisms within the same kind that have Y chromosomes that are even more different than humans and chimps. That was my argument. And then from there, you'd see how he totally misses my argument and goes on to something else.
Yeah.
That man is not related to chimpanzee, but that's the whole point of the Y chromosome. The fact that, I think it's like 70% similar when it should be a lot more similar to humans. And I know he uses the rat example of the Y chromosome. Matt, if you want to touch on that, isn't that just example of genetic degeneration in that specific chromosome?
Exactly. If you look up the Y chromosome and you look across species and human beings, the Y chromosome is crumbling and going extinct in every species, some faster than others, but it's always going downhill. It's not going up or even staying stable. It's always going down. It's the ultimate proof. And he actually said at the beginning of this, if we go back like maybe 1 minute, we don't have to replay it. I'm just saying he says that horses have fused chromosomes, but why can't humans? Well, this is easily answered with something right here. Here's the facts. All known mammalian chromosome fusion in living animals involves a specific category sequences called satellite DNA, right? This hypothetical fusion from ape to man would have been different than all known observed fusion events. So this is even more proof that it's just storytelling, pseudoscience. And
so you can pause right there for a while. So what he was saying, what that line he's reading there, he's reading it word for word from Tompkins' paper. No, I don't know where Tompkins got that from, but they did find satellite DNA. So let me just read what this paper here says. Oh, that's the paper I sent you with Oh, yeah, let me see.
Should I go back to this?
Chromosomes. Let me see. I sent you a link. Chromosome. I can send it to you again.
Yeah, I mean, I was just going to address that we are seeing animals in real time, like monotremes and rodents that are, and the Drosophila, that are basically compensating for the loss of sex-specific chromosomes, and they just have different sex-specific chromosomes. Like,
right. So that's what they don't explain is that the sex chromosome. First off, they don't explain how long it takes for a chromosome to degrade in a mammalian species. They don't even go there because it actually takes millions of years to happen. So they don't even go, and they wouldn't provide a model for that as to how fast it degrades. And then when it degrades, not like the species are going extinct. It just the sex determinant genes just ends up, being taken over by another chromosome, and then the cycle starts again. But it's a very slow process. Not like it's not genetic entropy as they envision it.
yeah, they're
Right. So
not
that's the
actually
link
suffering
there.
from this process.
No, they're not separate. It's not like the accumulation of deleterious mutations. But genetic entropy is anything, as I said. So even though you lose a gene, or you're just losing some, anything that is lost is genetic entropy.
Yeah.
think about this chromosome fusion.
Oh, and did you want to address? He was saying that the
the satellite
human
DNA.
fusion is completely different than any other fusion.
Right. So what he was saying is that they didn't find any satellite DNA, but the paper I just cited you says, "quote Genomic evidence of this chromosome fusion is supported by the presence of inverted telomeric repeats at the precise site of telomere fusion, as well as a block of degenerate centromeric satellite sequence on the long arm of of chromosome 2 that marks the region of the relic ancestral chromosome," end quote. So they did find the satellite DNA. I don't know what he's talking about. I don't know what Tompkins is talking about or what Romat is talking about. But obviously he's getting it from Tompkins. So.
Yeah, and that's the problem with this incestuous just only getting quotes from creationists is.
And related, if you were to take a single chromosome and gain it or lose it, what do you get? You get huge problems like Down syndrome. So let's use some logic here. Why would we assume then, why would Emo assume then that when humans gain a single chromosome or lose one, we get huge or horrible problems, and yet changing around 2 chromosomes is going to turn you back into an ape?
Well, you're not really losing in a fusion. You're not losing much. It's just changing where it is.
That this part was the funniest part of the video because for some reason he thinks that if we were to unfuse our chromosomes, we would revert back to apes. So you think that the chromosome fusion that was responsible for turning us into apes
or into humans.
And if you, turning us into humans, and if you reverse it, you would revert back to your ancestral state.
Yeah, it doesn't really matter what chromosome the gene is on.
Think about that. That's kind of crazy. If you
It's a chromosome fusion. It's not a
Sorry.
it's not a chromosome loss. It's a chromosome fusion, not a chromosome loss. It's something he did before, where he cited me a blog that has someone lining up foxes and saying, "Look, foxes are losing chromosomes," but the foxes weren't actually losing chromosomes. They were just chromosome fusions, and then they had the phylogeny was all wrong. They had they just lined it up based on the chromosome number alone. I don't know why they did that, but and they were arguing that chromosomes were being lost. But no, a fusion is not a loss. It's just a fusion. That's what it is. It's in the name. So I don't know, because I guess because they think when the chromosome fuses, you now have less chromosomes, then you have less information. I guess. I don't know.
It's kind of like, I don't know, like putting two pizzas in the same box. You have the same number of pizzas. They're just in the same box now.
Right. So it's the same amount of information, and nothing is necessarily lost there. I don't get it. Why he thinks it's a loss, but he's now talking about losing chromosomes and Down syndrome and all that. It didn't mention anything about losing chromosomes. It's a fusion, and my argument was on the number of chromosomes between humans and apes. Right? Creation would argue that you can't change chromosome number.
Except we see that within their kinds.
You see that within the kinds. They differ by 20, 30. You are up to 40, I think. Within foxes, you can get some with 60-something chromosomes, and then others with 30-something chromosomes. So they vary wildly.
Yeah, and just because you reduce the number of chromosomes doesn't mean that you've reduced the amount of genes. If you fuse a chromosome, you just get a bigger chromosome.
Truly believe that you can go into any geneticist now because they can fuse chromosomes genetically. That's not hard nowadays. Imagine walking in and saying, I want to unfuse chromosome 2. Matter of fact, do it to my kid because I want him to revert back to an ape to prove evolution. That guy would look at you like you're insane because that's not what would happen to the kid.
Yeah, it wouldn't. You're just changing the location of the information. You're not changing the information.
Here's the thing. He's taken his idea of what he thinks would happen when you unfuse a chromosome, that you would revert back to our ancestral state, an ape. And then he's saying that I think that. No, I never implied that at any time. So that's all from his head. It's because that's how he thinks evolution works. That you would go back to an ape if you fuse a chromosome. If you unfuse the chromosome.
And as if that's the only difference between apes and humans.
Right. So you think that's the reason why we're human, because we had a chromosome fusion. The chromosome fusion would have happened when the chromosome fusion would have happened in whatever ancestor it was. It would have still remained the same species. There just would have been a fusion that took place in one descendant, and then, it may have been just the dominant trait, and then it took over the population it wasn't.
Yep.
So fusion and this
a fusion wouldn't dramatically change. No, go ahead.
Okay.
Fusion, it's pretty crazy. The Y chromosome degradation is proof of genetic entropy. It shows that there's two different species of the same rodent. One is lost and the other is degrading. It's not proof of evolution at all. It's proof of what we believe. The similarity between great ape and the human chromosome, that's just crazy to compare it. Think about it. If we wanted to compare it, then humans line up to tobacco plants because we match them chromosome-wise, and potatoes match up to, what is it? What do they match?
Two left sides.
So why do we match up more with chimps than chimps do with gorillas? Where were we? I think we were at 106 something.
Of the same rodent, one is lost and the other is degrading. It's not a chromosome. That's just crazy to compare it. Think about it. If we wanted to compare it, then humans line up to tobacco plants because we match them chromosome-wise, and potatoes match up to, what is it? What do they match? Oh, they match chimps. Chimpanzees match potatoes chromosome-wise. So if you're going to base your phylogeny on chromosomes, that doesn't work either because we're related to
How
tobacco.
come we match up more with chimps, humans and chimps, than cats and tigers match up, even though they're the same kind?
So he's back to the same thing we were discussing before, where he doesn't understand how a cladogram is built. He thinks he should use just the chromosome number
Yeah.
to classify things. The same thing Kent Hovind does. So he says, "Why didn't you class and chromosome number?" It's the same argument. They don't understand how it's done. You don't just use a chromosome number. It's diagnostic traits.
Yep.
You don't understand what it is. It's a trait that is shared by.
Yeah. You're sounding a little bit quiet there.
It's getting
Yeah,
quiet.
you sound better now. That's good.
Okay, good. Yeah.
Plants, and chimps are related to potatoes.
Well, it's just like you said, the fact that in mammals, all documented chromosome fusions every way than any observed mammalian chromosome fusion. So his whole question and, the burden of proof that he puts on us it's fallacious is what it is. And not only that is the fact that, as you know, Matt, the telomeres, one of their main jobs as the end caps of the chromosome is to protect the DNA. And one of their only most important jobs is to prevent fusion. So why were they even involved in a fusion if one of their jobs is to prevent a fusion? And the fact that the alleged site where the fusion supposedly took place, we now know actually represents a highly organized functional gene. There's significant.
Well, we know fusions happen, so I don't see how this is a question.
Yeah. So I don't know where the argument comes from, because they themselves they have to accept that fusion happened. They get that kind of chromosome variation they have. And the thing is, yes, normally the telomeres would prevent fusion. That's normally. But again, it's the same thing with rare and never.
Yeah.
That's happening here. So it's a rare event where a chromosome would fuse. Yeah, but it doesn't mean that it doesn't happen. And what he doesn't understand is that when he talks about a gene that is in the fusion site, I think Kripser or whatever his name was, what I think was trying to explain this for him. And the same thing I read online too is that normal chromosomes would they have the telomeres would prevent fusion, but sometimes the chromosomes could misbehave or whatever. And what would happen is the subtelomeric regions, the subtelomeric regions would fuse together, head to head. So that would cause a chromosome to fuse. And what happens is normally genes don't exist. Normally a gene won't be in the telomere, but there are genes that can exist in the subtelomeric regions. So what would happen if you have two chromosomes where they telomeres or maybe degraded or whatever? That sometimes happens, and they fuse together. You would have the two subtelomeric regions fusing together, and then the genes that would be there would be next to the fusion site. And the thing is, genes can move along a chromosome, so I don't see why it's so hard to imagine a gene finding itself in the fusion site. Because when a chromosome joins, when two chromosomes join together as one, they start to behave like one. So then the genes just move along the chromosome as it would normally, just move across the fusion site.
Yep.
Significant lack
For
of
some reason,
evidence
he's
for.
not getting that part. I don't. Yeah, so you have to explain why exactly is the problem for evolution. You have to explain why it can't happen. Just say there's a gene that spans the fusion site, therefore evolution. Humans didn't evolve from apes, so the fusion didn't happen. No, you need to explain why that can't happen first. They give an explanation. You know, genes not supposed to be there, or they you give a mechanism that would prevent the gene from being there, and then but then he gave no mechanism for that. I can easily explain that by saying that, for example, again, genes move along chromosomes. They're not fixed, so they can just easily move to that position.
Yeah, we know fusions happen. We know gene translocations happen, but they're trying to make this special case where it couldn't have happened for humans.
Right. Basically that.
For a cryptic centromere site. It's totally different. So his question is null and void. The question that ESC always asks. He needs to study the actual so-called chromosomal 2 fusion more in depth, because he's clearly new to it, since we've always brought this argument up and he's never had any rebuttals. The thing about ESC is his little presentation here. He now has slides to go with his typical arguments. I debated him on Praise's channel for 3 hours. He used all the same arguments. They've all been refuted. He just now has some fancy pictures to go along with it. He's kind of like Snake was right, and he'll be refuted. He'll be presented the evidence. For example, genetic entropy, he even admitted to it in one of our debates, a couple debates ago.
When was
Then he'll
that? I don't know what he's referring to, but I admitted to.
Right. So in regards to what he thinks I admitted to, so he thinks I admitted to genetic entropy. He asked a question. I remember him asking a question. He said, he put up a short video of it on the channel where he also, it was a hypothetical question. He says, if we were to investigate, because we were talking about some virus that went from a hot pandemic to a whimper to an extinction event, word for word from Stanford. He said, if I was to investigate it, and it comes, the evidence shows that it was indeed due to genomic decay, would that count as evidence for genetic entropy? And I told him, well, yeah, it was a hypothetical question. So I gave him an answer for it. I said, if, because he started the question with if.
Hmm.
And yeah, but in reality, that's not the case. That's not what happened to the virus. The virus just wasn't, it was actually the host that developed immunity against the virus, and then the virus went extinct that way, not by means of genetic entropy. So it 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 it's not the case. It's not evidence of genetic entropy. So that's what he's using. I'm saying I accepted genetic entropy. I never did accept genetic entropy. He asked a hypothetical question. If this was the case, if you would accept as if would count as evidence for genetic entropy, and told him yes, that would count. If it turns out to be that the virus went extinct by that means.
And
but it didn't.
And of course, we do accept genomic decay, but the thing is that we also accept that there are forces that balance that out and counteract that. The creationists are the ones denying that part of it.
Right. And the thing is, it's not to say that species can't go extinct by means of accumulated mutations. It's not impossible. What? They are making an argument that everything is going down the hill that way. Every single lineage is going inevitably going extinct. That's the thing that I don't accept, obviously.
Yeah, another typical creationist, sum equals all. They always make those leaps.
They always make those leaps. And the thing is, if you want to argue that genomes are degrading in a general sense, everything is degrading, then you need data for that. You can't just give me one example of something and then conclude genetic entropy. You need data to show, at least show me, genetic entropy happening in each phylum or whatever of organisms. That you have an example from each phylum we have, or not even phylum. Phylum may be too large, but each order of mammals, for example. You show an example of this happening, so we can have like a larger sample size. You show me a couple examples of this, maybe a dozen examples of genetic entropy causing extinction in species. Then you have a case. But just one example, even if that was true, that with a virus going extinct by genetic entropy, that's just one example. You need to show that this is happening in a general sense. You need a larger sample size. That's just how science is. You can't just go on one example.
And even if we're assuming that this is causing some species to go extinct, it's only happening in some species at differential rates, so it seems obvious that there's something that's counteracting it in the species that aren't going extinct.
Correct. Because they talk about, he usually talks about Lenski's experiment and so on, that it demonstrates genetic entropy. But then, how long was the bacteria alive even before Lenski made an experiment on them? Obviously, they had to be there since creation week.
Yeah.
So you mean that the bacteria survived for 6,000 years and they're still alive today? They don't seem to be going extinct. So what is it with they would normally say that bacteria, they because they're asexual and they don't mutate as much. Well, fine. We do have sexually like insects, for example. They reproduce a lot. They have high mutation rates and so on. Why aren't they going extinct due to genetic entropy?
Yeah, where is the limit of this? How many generations? If this is occurring, you should be able to calculate it.
I mean, they have the models, the calculations, but it doesn't go beyond what Sanford calculated. That's it. There's no real world application to show this thing is actually happening outside of your calculation. There's nothing wrong with calculation, but it needs to be based in reality.
Mm-hmm.
Go back on it, look at.
And realistically, though, this would occur in very small populations and would make them go extinct in about 100 generations if it was happening. And yet they want us to think that a single breeding pair for most of these things survived past 100 generations while this decay is happening. Somehow their genes were so pure that it didn't have an effect back then.
And basically that's the argument they use. They said that they didn't have enough time to accumulate. That's the same thing Son of the Truth uses, that they didn't have enough time to accumulate the deleterious mutations at the flood, at the time of the flood. But now, apparently, they accumulated enough now to be going extinct. But it doesn't actually show species going extinct by means of genetic entropy. Romat was talking about some insects that were going extinct, some butterflies, but that was due to global warming, not genetic entropy.
Yeah, I mean, technically, everything that goes extinct isn't evolving fast enough to adapt. But
some more, creationist debunking websites and thinks he's found the answer of all answers, and then that answer fails, as we're proving, here. And I debunked. I think it was in my recent debate with Adam Friended. We talked about chromosome 2 fusion, and after he heard the evidence, I think his only argument or rebuttal to it was, well, maybe we're in a simulation. Like, that's literally what they have to conclude, because anything but the God of the Bible. But all evidence points to the God of the Bible and points to a literal Genesis. So yeah,
well, I don't think Adam's a biologist or anything. That's one thing as creationists will point out, like, oh, these organizations said not to debate creationists. It's because they're highly practiced in these very specific arguments that, like, people who aren't biologists aren't going to get, or who haven't looked into it.
Yeah. Let me see.
That was a great point you brought up there about the satellite DNA, Matt. I think that is absolutely key, and that's something we need to take advantage of in future debates. We really need to bring that up.
Yeah, you're right. Most people don't ask about it, though. The chromosome 2 fusion thing is kind of like, I don't know if they talk about it very much anymore. I haven't seen it come up in a debate, so it's just...
Well, it's a technical argument. That's why most people who are defending evolution, they kind of just know the basics. So, but a lot of people do say, that is one of the number one best forms of evidence.
I mean, I've been trying to debate SFT on specifically the fusions and the genetics of ape to humans for a while now, but he hasn't really taken me up on that.
No, creationists don't like specific debates on specific topics
Yeah,
because yeah, they won't be able to run around. There's not much room to run around.
and like Bill Morgan was like, it was very clear with him. He was like, well, I want to debate the whole picture. I want to debate the creation of the universe and everything, even though we're just debating evolution. They always try to expand it so that they can talk in generalities.
Yeah, because Dapper Dino said he wanted to debate him on the evolution of birds, and he said they keep telling him about the whole ball game. I said no, just want to debate this one subject. You already debated the ball game already, but they just keep wanting to debate origins. They want to debate origins.
Yeah,
Why can't you just debate? Why can't you debate birds? You see, the reason is they don't have enough wiggle room there to, gish gallop or whatever. Because as soon as you refute whatever argument they have on the evolution of birds, they have nothing left. They can't jump on another species and say, "Hey, but you can't explain whales," and whatever. They usually do that.
yeah. I kind of just let them go off and then ignore that and just go with the specifics anyway, and just kind of try and get them in the conversation.
Evidence for ape to human ancestry, but I mean, it's been debunked. Everything in the realm of junk DNA has been overturned. The chromosome 2 fusion has been a failed prediction. They always say, evolutionists are making all the testable
Was
predictions.
it a prediction though, or just an explanation?
No, they're not.
Chromosome.
Yeah, I mean, are we really making predictions based on that, or just saying like that was probably a fusion?
They did predict that there would be a fusion because when you look at the chromosome number of the great apes, we are the ones with the least. So it had to be a fusion.
And it does have the features of a fusion.
Yeah, it does have the features of it does have the even the features they are talking about with the satellite DNA and so on. And it's funny that they say it's not there. I like how he said that. I think it's a good thing for me to bring it up in the next debate. For them to bring it up in the next debate. Well, fine. I'll love them to bring it up in the debate. I would have a stand of the truth. I don't know when I would have it. Maybe I guess as much it might be maybe next year. Okay, it doesn't seem too busy, too enthusiastic to debate.
Yeah, he said he's probably
I don't
getting
know
back into it after December or something.
Yeah, so I'll see. Maybe for the new year I'll be debating him, but that'll give me much more time to edit my presentation if any, and kind of make sure it's more compact.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because most of their predictions are failing. But now the predictions coming from the intelligent design movement and the creationist side, those are what's coming true. I mean, we're the ones that are actually predicting that the vast majority of our genome is functional. And with all the accumulating papers and accumulating knowledge we're getting, that's exactly what we're finding. It's so funny because somebody like ESE, he'll say like, oh, they've never said that everything was junk. They predicted some function. And yes, evolutionists have said, well, there's probably some function in these non-coding areas. But we're predicting that the vast majority, over 80%, is functional. Even the evolutionary scientists I've spoken to will say, well, it can't be any more than 15 or 20% functional because they know with the mutation rate.
Well, again, he's equivocating two different usages of function.
Right. He does that a lot. I actually had a discussion in the chat in a comment section with him, and he's citing a paper with it. But the author is saying that the genome can't be more than 15% functional. But by function, and they clearly define function as being, basically for coding for protein.
Mm.
So he's not getting the context of what the author is using. He's using a different definition than the author, and then trying to, say that, well, look, the evidence contradict what that person is saying. But the evidence only contradicts them if you take what they're saying out of context or in a different context of what you think it is. So first of all, you need to be on the same page as to what you mean by function and what the person means by function, and then you can make the argument.
Yep.
But
Right.
creation is as long as it does, it has function.
that destroys any form of fish to fisherman evolution. So they have to say that it can't be any more than 15 or 20% functional. So they'll go to this rescue device like, oh, we never expected and we never said that it would be all junk. Yeah, you did, because they admit 80% of it has to be junk and useless. So that's another argument I wanted to.
Not useless, but just non-coding. Because one of the uses is that it's kind of doesn't do much, so it can absorb mutations.
A few from them.
Nice, nice.
And where's the evidence of this in ancient apes too? Have you ever heard of this chromosome 2 fusion in ancient apes?
Are you saying in their so-called
yeah, with their fossil record or whatever? I never heard of chromosome 2 with their ape ancestors. Where's the evidence of that?
Right, yeah, they'll say, yeah, it's all hypothetical. It's all storytelling. Well, that's what's funny, because even though there's so much evidence praise, I'm glad you brought up that. It's a good question. Even though there's so much evidence against the so-called chromosomal 2 fusion, even if there was, it's indirect evidence anyways, because they'll say that when, the common ancestor, when humans and chimps split from our common ancestor, in the human line is where supposedly this chromosomal 2 fusion occurred, right? Because we've got less chromosomes than apes, so they have to account for that somehow. So it's all theoretical. Down the human line is where it supposedly occurred, but yeah, like you said, there's no fossil evidence or DNA evidence for that. So even if
except in the DNA, it has the telltale signs of fusion.
Yeah, well, basically, all creationist arguments for some reason just either they get something out of context, or they have to ignore some data or whatever. I don't know why all their arguments are that way.
Well, it has to be, or else it all falls apart.
there was
He's arguing against the DNA function and chromosome 2 fusion, and he's just ignoring the data, the of how fusions work, of how genes behave, what junk DNA means. So it's just a failure, man.
Nope.
Okay, well, we could easily say that this chromosome 2 fusion happened in the human line, because that's where they say it happened as well.
Right.
So
I mean, that's why I bring
either
it
way,
up.
they lose.
It could be humans, not apes.
They could have easily, there could have been a chromosomal 2 fusion, immediately pre-flood, and it was all passed, or immediately post-flood, and it was all passed on just in time for everybody.
So now they're saying it's actually plausible, as long as it's done on their time scale.
Right. So you're saying that despite all the evidence, even if it did happen, it's compatible with creationism. But that's the thing. Everything is compatible with creationism. It doesn't matter how it occurred. It's still compatible. It doesn't matter how species appear or where they appear or when they appear. It's because nothing could falsify the assumption of creationism. Is it either it falls into the bracket of common design, or it falls within the bracket of created heterozygosity, or God just made it that way. And there's nothing limiting what God can do with respect to designs. So nothing could honestly falsify creationism.
Yeah, if part of your model is there's a being that can do anything and everything, then there's nothing that it can't explain. That's why it's unfalsifiable and basically useless. Because the explanation is just going to be God did it, which doesn't help us.
Right. Basically, even things that when you talk about the starlight problem and so on, they would just say that God brought the light in, and so on. So it doesn't matter if the evidence actually refutes them. They're just God did it that way, or God made the earth look old. He wouldn't make when he was building the earth, he didn't care about what it would look like. He just made the earth. It's just you interpreting it with your evolutionary bias or whatever.
Mm.
That's how God did it. Yeah.
I'm just saying. I mean, we can come up with stories like they do too, but the genetic evidence says that there was no fusion. They need that's the thing, praise. They absolutely have to have a fusion event in order to explain the
Yeah,
difference
exactly.
between apes and humans. Like they absolutely have to have it. So it's clearly a failed prediction. There has been some rebuttal to Dr. Jeffrey Tompkins' original paper. For example, like no real peer-reviewed rebuttal, but like Rationale Mind, for example, Matt knows about him. And Jackson Weed, of course, who just regurgitates their arguments. But Dr. Tompkins came out with another peer-reviewed paper just recently in the last couple of years titled Debunking the Debunkers. Very technical paper. Anybody interested could read it. And what he does is he debunks those so-called arguments against his original paper debunking chromosome 2 fusion, and that's never been touched. I've actually sourced it and given it to these guys, and they can't touch it.
Oh yeah, I started reading it and it's pretty flawed. So I haven't finished it yet, but I definitely wanted to talk to SFT about it. But I haven't hurried up at all because we haven't nailed down a date for the ape debate.
Oh, yeah. Um, Let me see.
It's kind of basically what they were saying is like the fact that there are some reverse sequences and there's a gene that's crossing the subtelomeric regions, and it's like none of this is actually impossible. So
Yeah, they never go to explain why this can't happen. They think it's to them they think it can't happen. Therefore, well, it's evidence against evolution. But you need to explain why something can't happen. Like, you need to give an explanation or mechanism that would prevent that from happening.
they're just saying that it's atypical, so it can't have naturally happened. But I mean, everything that happens is almost everything is atypical. It's just it happened to be this one outcome. Like if you have those spinning wheels on a game show, any individual like category that actually comes up when it stops spinning was unlikely and atypical, but it was going to land on one of them. Even if the probability of landing on that specific one was very low, it's gonna land on one.
It is a rock solid paper. That argument's dead.
Great stuff.
Yeah, if you want to keep going with the video, and then Matt, you can talk a bit. I'm gonna go find that paper and put it in the chat.
Very
Good idea.
With evolution on a whole. Here we have a paper from Murata et al. That talks about the genus of Japanese spiny rats. Here it is.
I have a quick question for you, Matt, or even SFT. Hasn't only 3% of the genome been sequenced anyway? I mean, even if we're talking about 3% of the genome, and it's like 80 whatever percent it is, I mean, what happens to the other 97%? And that would dramatically go down, wouldn't it? I mean, wouldn't it go down to like 20%?
Well, it depends. The Human Genome Project is claimed to have done the entire human genome now.
Wow. I mean, I thought like the ape genome. I'm not sure if that was right, 3%, but that's what
Well, a lot of it, like with the human genome, a lot of it is biochemical evidence right now, right? With ENCODE, for example.
Yeah.
But the evolutionists, to build their phylogenetic charts, when they're looking at DNA level nested hierarchies, for example, and that's a huge thing too, right? So creationists predict nested hierarchies anyways. It's obvious. Obviously, just looking at, let's say, a human, a chimpanzee, a dog, and a fish. Okay.
But the kinds themselves are within nested hierarchies with relation to each other. Like birds are nested within dinosaurs. It's not just that they're nested hierarchies within birds. It's that they're dogs are within wolves. Wolves are within mammalia. Are you still there? Uh-oh. Can you not hear me or anything? Or are you just gone? Am I still making noise? Is there a delay? Again, like last time when we ended? I just heard the rooster from your end. Alright, well, I can't hear you. Doesn't say you're muted. I don't know if you're... I don't think you're talking at all because I can hear your background noise. Alright, well, if you're disconnected, I think that's about long enough for today. Let's see. Let's just get a refresher so we know where we are for next time.
And that's a huge thing too, right? So creationists predict nested hierarchies anyways. It's obvious. Obviously, just looking at, let's say, a human, a chimpanzee, a dog, and a fish. Okay, there's a nested hierarchy there, obviously, because
Alright, I think that's a good place to stop for now. Yeah, all streams end the same. Just avoid. Well, anyway, thanks for anyone who's watching, and we're going to keep going on this series until we're exhausted, and then we're going to keep going. All right.